Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Eljay Johnsen Show. This show airs every single weekend, every Saturday at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, unless specified otherwise over on Twitter at the Eljay Johnsen, where you can find updates and guest announcements every single Tuesday. And if you have any questions over the week, make sure you head on over to my email, ljjohnson@fudge. I almost had it. ljjohnson@gmail.com. Remember, that's JOHNSEN. Whew. Okay, goodness. It's been a while since I've done that because we had the week break because I was at Brick Fair, and then what a mess. Anyway, obviously enough, I am quite excited for my next guest today. He is a renowned author, especially in the LEGO community, being the author of several different novels for a few series. I believe NINJAGO, Exo-Force. Oh, heavens. Oh, gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Is this... Oh, yeah, Hero Factory and some small theme called Bionicle. It's, of course, Mr. Greg Farshtey. How you doing today?
Hi, LJ.
How's it going? Hopefully you're well.
I'm fine. I'm just very excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm immensely excited. Obviously enough, the last time I spoke with you was 2012, I want to say. It's been like 5 years.
Yeah.
Goodness, what a 5 years. A lot has happened. So, we'll go ahead and get into things. First, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question that I've been trying to incorporate over time, and that is, how is the weather?
Well, it is a little rainy today. It is a little bit more humid than it has been. It's supposed to get very hot beginning of the week, but then cool off toward the end of the week. So,
Yeah, that's not bad.
It's bearable. It's actually a little cooler, I think, outside the house than it is inside the house.
Oh, goodness. Huh. That's... Yeah, no, I mean, I can't exactly relate to the humidity. Because I live out in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. You know, it's a nice, flat place, and it's a dry heat. It's super, super dry. So, but do you like humidity? Do you mind it? Does it...
I'm not a big fan of humidity. I actually deal better with the cold than I do with the heat because I'm half Russian, so we have that insulation built into us.
Yep, that makes sense, and I agree with you.
So
Yeah, no, I cannot stand the heat. Ugh, gosh.
I like fall.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I like the smell of the fall and just the temperatures and the leaves crunching and the whole bit.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. Does it do for you what it does over here, where soon as September hits, as soon as it hits, it's an immediate change. The nights start getting really, really cool. You get in the 50s.
No,
40s.
not necessarily. It's still a lot of times it's still summer here until October. And spring where I live is a week of rain.
Oh, well.
You're kind of like, oh, in the spring I'm going to get out. I'm going to take care of the weeds. I'm going to do all this stuff before it gets hot. Spring is a week of rain, and that's 104 degrees.
Ow! I can't even begin to fathom that. Like, the few times I've been in Virginia have been exciting because, it's summer, it's August, and whenever it rains, like when it rains in Idaho, it rains, it's gradual, and then it kind of picks up a little bit, and then it goes away, and it comes back like maybe 30 minutes later. In Virginia, there's no gradual startup. It's just whoop, and it's just raining and raining and raining for 5 minutes, and you're the most soaked you've ever been.
No, you get that week of rain, and then you got 8-foot tall weeds in the backyard. And, I have triffids in my yard. So.
Oh gosh,
Every day they move closer to the house.
Ugh. Oh gosh, do you just like weed them, or do you like take some sort of like a spray?
Well, I basically have a choice. I can try to keep the inside of the house under control, or the outside of the house. And so I figure, well, this stuff's all in the backyard. Nobody can see it anyway, so that's not my priority.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's fair. Okay, well, in that case, not that you necessarily need any introduction, but go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing now and what you've been up to recently.
Okay. Well, my official title is Creative Specialist. with the agency at Lego, which is our in-house. It's basically an in-house advertising agency. My previous title was editorial director, but they changed it because they don't have editorial directors at advertising agencies. My main responsibility is overseeing the Lego Life magazine, which I also, I write all of, and doing other work that is that comes up, whether it's for the app or just other stuff that comes along. You really don't know week to week what you're going to be doing. Mm-hmm. My background is journalism, game design, and direct market copywriting. I've been at Lego since October of 2000. So it's 20 years next year.
Goodness.
And I've done an awful lot of stuff. I mean, in the time that I've done everything from write the lyrics for the song that the Robot Band was singing at FAO Schwartz in 2001 to the comic books and just a lot of different stuff.
No kidding. Yeah, you've like I said, I was just rattling off a few earlier, just a few of the stuff that you've worked on, but it doesn't do justice to exactly how much you've really been involved in, at least as far as people like I would be concerned. Like,
yeah, and it's interesting because it was all so different. I mean, like the experience of writing the Hero Factory books was completely different from writing Bionicle, because characterization was not that big of a deal in Hero Factory. It was really plot driven. So I used to write those books in 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I work 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day for 2 days and write the whole book in a weekend.
Wow. Goodness gracious. See, that's the kind of stuff I really want to delve into here, because obviously it'd be easy to just talk to you about Bionicle for however long, because that's something I'm super well versed in, and obviously you know a little bit about it. But the other stuff is stuff that I find super fascinating. So we have a lot of questions that were sent in via email, and they cover a lot of Bionicle stuff. So for now, let's go all the way back to the beginning, because it's been 5 years. Let's go and start off how you kind of got into writing, just in general.
In general? Well, I've been writing since probably 4th grade.
Wow.
And when I really got heavily into it when I was in high school, because I did an underground newspaper when I was in high school that came out, I believe it was weekly, if I remember correctly. And it went out to maybe 40 or 50 people that I knew, so it became very popular because not everybody could get it. And, when not everybody can get something, everybody wants it. And I still have a lot of friends from back then that had it at the time, and a lot of them still have their copies of it all these years later. So that was really the first time I was writing stuff that was entertaining people and they wanted to see. And then when I got out of college, I thought that I was going to end up going into some kind of a sales job, but I lucked out and basically got a newspaper job, and a few years after that got a game job, which I made absolutely no money at, but it was extremely creative. And stressful as anything, but very creative. And then I had that job for 7 years, and then I went to do a copywriting at a direct marketing firm, and that was soul destroying. And then I got the job at Lego, so it was just like I dined and gone ahead. Because Lego is an awesome company to work for in terms of how employees are treated, what the corporate culture is, just how family oriented they are. Pretty much, anything you would assume a place like Lego would be, it pretty much is.
Okay, and so yeah, like you mentioned, you've been working there since 2000, October of 2000.
Yes.
How drastically has the company changed since then? I mean, over 20 years, there have to have been some some changes in, heck, even how it operates.
Oh, well, I mean, it was run a certain way when I went to work there, and then of course they had a few rough years, and
Mm-hmm.
but they eventually turned it around by just focusing on the core business,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had just an unprecedented 10-year run of massive growth,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's settled down to be a little bit more normal. But things change a lot there. I mean, things change all the time, and I pretty much learned that if you don't like something, just wait because it'll change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, kind of like the weather. That's why I live in the banana belt. Wait 5 minutes and the weather's bananas. So, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, in that time, I have like a oh gosh, there's this website and like it's got an entry for you. It's like a fiction database, I guess. It's got an entry for you
Yeah.
as an author, and it's got like all these different like all the books that you've written. And in the time you've been working for Lego, you've only really been working on Lego properties. Is that correct?
Yeah, all of my freelance up until actually this year, since I started at Lego, has been Lego related. But at this point, that work dried up
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago, partly because of the fact that a lot of publishing houses now have their editors writing the books. They're not
Uh,
using outside writers anymore.
mm-hmm.
Um, and in some cases, when you've been doing something for a long time, people just want to get somebody new and fresh to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I haven't had any of that work in a few years now. Right now, I'm doing a personalized children's book for a publisher in Slovenia,
Really?
um, and that's what I'm working on now. Which that should be wrapped up by the end of the year. And then I'm also writing two or three things of my own. Um, that are for grown-ups.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, because I mean, you've published books outside of Lego prior, in a couple of
Yeah,
years.
I had three novels published before I came to Lego, and a whole ton of role-playing game books.
Mm-hmm. And that's something you mentioned, and that's actually something I'd love to inquire with you. I haven't done a whole lot of D&D, RPG, role playing, RPing, and the like in the traditional sense, like a couple of things on like BZ Power or something. But I also, at the time growing up, don't remember it being as prevalent as it is now. Do you still occasionally partake in like RPGs, some Dungeons and Dragons
No,
sessions, or no?
not really. No, I did. I game mastered a Tales from the Crypt adventure for some people that I work with. I think it was last year, and that was the first time I'd done anything with that since I left West End.
Okay.
Um, um, yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't something that I was involved with at all. And the thing is, because of being a father, I just don't have the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't go every week and go do something like that because I have her every week. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So fair enough. Um, Now, what kind of a what would you describe? You mentioned just a little bit ago that there was a substantial difference writing, say, Hero Factory, as opposed to Bionicle.
yes,
How different was every theme as different as that, or were there some similarities, some kind of things you could kind of springboard
there
off of?
were there were always some differences. I mean, for example, um, with Ninjago, you had to be very aware of what the TV series was doing.
Mm-hmm.
You had a little bit more stringent approval process because of that. Um, Whereas with Bionicle, you almost never got any pushback or an asked to change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but with Ninjago, you would usually have to make revisions to stuff um, to bring it more in line with what the overall plan was to do. And um, now there are rules for writing for it that didn't exist at the time that I was writing for it. So and I haven't done anything for that since the Dark Island books, and that was a case of writing a script, but it wasn't my story; it was somebody else's story. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a totally different experience. It was like writing a movie novelization, really, because it was somebody else's story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see. I've only had experience in the little bit of writing I've done casually a long time ago that I'm going to hope is still buried in the now defunct BZP servers. Um, it was always, I've only ever experienced, writing in the world of, say, Bionicle, for instance, or some comic related something or other. Sorry, not Marvel, DC, BZP comics. That's a whole other subculture.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand how that would differ from, say, an original work that you're working on, or heck, might I suggest even Bionicle.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
oh, please continue.
No, go ahead.
So,
I get the feeling there's a question buried in it.
kinda, sorta, mainly now that so much time has passed between all of these different themes. What were some instances where you were trying to figure out a solution to a problem, and you're just trying to figure it out, and then you finally did, and you go, this process. Oh gosh, let me rephrase. You mentioned, I think the last time we spoke, about the creative process regarding Bionicle, the creative writing process, or even just the entire production behind it when it
Mm-hmm.
came to kind of the creative side of things. How much do you feel that kind of changed how you worked on Bionicle as opposed to, for instance, Exo-Force?
Uh, well, I mean, the main thing with Bionicle was that I was at least, especially in toward the later years, directly involved with coming up with the story.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the early years, but in the later years. Whereas something like Exo-Force, I had no involvement at all.
Okay.
I knew what the story was, and I was writing, based on what I knew it to be, but I didn't have anything to do with creating it. And really the same with Ninjago. I mean, that was all being handled by Denmark and the TV people. So, you knew what it was, you got the information on it, but you didn't have any hand in actually creating what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So Bionicle, you probably felt a little bit more ownership because of that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as wrestling with story, the hard part with Bionicle, having done so much of it, just kind of like not letting yourself get bored.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I would do things like just write the whole book backwards.
Mm-hmm.
I'd write the end and I'd go backwards to the beginning, just to see if I could do it. The most fun, I think, with those books in terms of wrestling with stuff, there's a story that I tell, and I may have even told it to you guys 7 years ago. Back when Orson Welles played the Shadow on the radio, he was notorious for the fact that he did not rehearse, and he never read the script before he did the show.
I vaguely recall this.
And they asked him why, and he said, because when my character's in a death trap, I want it to sound like I really don't know how I'm going to get out.
Mm-hmm.
He says, if I know what happens on the next page, I already know how I'm getting out.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I would throw the heroes into a death trap in Bionicle, I had no idea how they were escaping.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would usually take me 3 or 4 hours of wandering around the house to figure out how they were going to escape.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of became a challenge for myself, is just like come up with traps that are really good and then have to figure out how to get them out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and this is obviously, not being a writer myself, this is all fascinating to me because like, to me it makes a lot of sense. I know that there are a bunch of different writing styles, and like there are a lot of different ways to kind of go about it. Like you even mentioned, like writing the book backwards, or
Mm-hmm.
I've heard some people just drop themselves right in the middle. They make up a scenario, and it's like, all right, now I got to extend it to the end, to the beginning. And so for this one, you mentioned it's kind of writing by the seat of your pants, in a sense.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that do outline, and it probably goes faster and more smoothly for them. But what I have found, because I have had to write outlines in the past, is that you lose your freedom, you lose your latitude for your characters to grow because you've already decided everything that they're going to do. And when you create a character, they are in their own way a real person within that fictional universe. And you can't just make them do things that are out of character for them. Because the second, and the analogy I've used when I've talked to schools about writing is, if you have a best friend, you can probably predict what your best friend would say or do in any given situation because you know them really well. Yeah. If they do something completely out of character, then you're never going to be able to predict what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Your characters should be your best friends. You should know them well enough that they're your best friends. And so if you have them do something that doesn't make any sense for them to do, then you're not going to have a really hard time writing them because you're not going to have any idea what to do then. And some of the best stuff I've written, especially before I was writing for Lego, I would sit down and say, okay, today I'm going to write this scene where this happens, and I ended up writing something completely different and with no idea where it came from, basically because the character wanted to do that. And I've had stories where I wanted a character to do a certain thing in the book, and they just refused. And it didn't matter what I did; they just weren't going to do it. There was just no way to make it in character for them. And there are times that you may have to go back, throw out 60 or 70 pages because at some point you veered off track, and your character is now in a situation where they didn't want to do any of those things, and so they're not cooperating anymore.
Yeah. Did you ever have almost like a character sheet? Like you just had quick blurbs, like you would take character traits of a certain character and you just kind of put a pin in them. It's like, all right, now this is a trait, this is a trait, this is a trait. Or did it, or
to some extent we had that with Bionicle because we had the story Bibles. And so the story Bibles would usually have a character description in there, so that we would work to. For the stuff that I've written that was not Lego related, no. I usually had a first scene with them in my head. And the analogy I've used is that it's kind of like sleigh riding. When you start writing a book, you're pushing the sled up the hill. And once you get to know the characters, they should be able to tell you the story, and you're just sledding down the hill. You're just typing it. They're telling you the story.
And that makes a lot of sense. I have never been in that mindset, no matter what I'm doing or creating. But to me, that makes a lot of sense to do. I understand, some people, especially in the Bionicle community, they're like, oh, but I want to know. I want to know what happens next. I want to know that there's a foundation. There's a road we're traveling down, and so they get really critical about certain decisions or certain things, which is actually something I do need to ask you to clarify again, which I shouldn't have to. I already know the answer to this question, but it bears repeating, or warrants repeating. You were never the head of the Bionicle story team at any point, right?
No.
Yeah.
No. When I started, Bob Thompson was basically running the Bionicle story team, although technically it was always the marketing lead who ran the story team. And Bob would pretty much tell us this is what the story is, and that would be it. When he was gone, there really was no head of the story team. I mean, I was working with Advance and the web producer and the other people that were involved in it, but there was nobody other than the marketing person who was in charge in terms of coming up with what story. We'd throw out ideas, we'd build on each other's ideas. By the time we were done, it wasn't any one person's idea. It was, we had all worked on it. So, no, I mean, I was never in a position. I could make suggestions. I could throw ideas out. but that didn't mean they were going to get taken.
Mm-hmm.
So I was never in a position to determine overall direction of main story. What I was able to do was, in some cases, tell my own stories because we were putting out more books in a year than we needed for main story.
Mm-hmm.
So I could do stuff like Time Trap, which was just me going completely off the reservation because I could.
No, that's fair. I mean, obviously, Time Trap is a renowned classic of. I would argue it's easily the best thing to come out of. I think.
Oh, it's my favorite one of all of them.
Yeah,
it's that one and Darkness Below I liked a lot.
Oh gosh, wait! Darkness Below.
That was the one with the shapeshifter in the archives underneath Metro Nui. Yeah,
that was the first one I read. That's one of my favorites. Oh gosh, I like that one.
Yeah, I really liked her as a character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't vouch for her as a combination model, but yes, no, the character was a lot of fun to read. But okay, yeah. So I mean, I know that like you've mentioned this over the years, and I hate having to delve into the repetition, but it happens so often. People are like, "Oh, Greg was he was head of story team and X, Y, and Z," and there are a lot of, especially community side, there are a lot of assumptions that then become a game of telephone, where it's like, Greg made it so that the island of Matanui was destroyed by the giant robots, and then it goes, he created the giant robot, and then it devolves and devolves and devolves.
No, well, there's still a lot of people that think I created the line, and I didn't have anything to do with creating the line. I wasn't even working here when the line was created.
That's true. Yeah, no, that's actually another good clarification.
No, the whole story Bible was done. The sets were all designed. We were 5 months from release when I came on board. I knew nothing about it until I started working there because it wasn't what I was hired to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, starting off as you mentioned, what you were hired to do. I think you had mentioned it. You were assigned specifically to the magazine, if I'm not mistaken.
I was hired. My official title when I was hired was Lego Club Writer.
Okay.
And I worked under Heidi Bailey and Steve Hawko in Lego Direct. Mm-hmm. And I was also writing the copy for the Shop at Home catalog at that time. Mm-hmm. And my job was to write the magazine. And I was doing it by myself until Daniel Lipkowitz came on board a little bit later on. And now I'm back to doing it by myself. So kind of has come full circle. Mm-hmm. And we've had periods over the years where the magazine was huge and a lot of people were really interested in it and we had a big readership. And then we've had periods where it hasn't gotten as much attention and we haven't had as big a readership. Now the pendulum's starting to swing the other way and there is a lot more support for it now. So I think it's going to get, better and you're going to see more membership and that sort of thing going forward.
Okay. Now, I'm... Please advertise very briefly for us. I'm not actually very familiar with the current program. I was signed up for whichever magazine the comics came with. And I don't exactly...
Yeah, well, that was the magazine. Okay, that was Lego magazine.
Yeah.
But it has now... It became Lego Life magazine when the Lego Life app came out.
Okay. Now, is it specific to the app now, or is it an actual physical magazine still?
No, it's still an actual physical magazine.
Okay.
We do have call-outs for app content, certainly in some cases, but it still exists independent of the app. And because of the fact that, we know that kids love getting mail that's addressed to them. And they don't throw their magazines out. They keep them for years and years and years and years. And it still serves the same purpose of engagement and entertainment and awareness and showing kids how to role play with the toys that it always has. And it's like they do research all the time on this magazine and the effectiveness of it. And it really hasn't changed in 20 years. It's still an enormously effective program.
Okay. All right. Does this still come with comics like every so often?
No, that was something that the U.S. market paid for, the Bionicle comic.
Really?
It was really a U.S. market initiative. It wasn't really available in Europe all that much.
Huh.
Um, and that was something that, the market group paid for. And at this point, we don't have those kind of inserts in the magazine anymore, except for posters occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's no, in a lot of cases, the comics that are being done for existing lines are being done by licensed magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And then it may get reprinted in another country or something, but it's not a case of us doing our own comic book anymore.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Now, I understand there was like a really interesting kind of relationship when it came to the Bionicle comics that I don't know how much you'd be privy to. DC was somehow involved, I
Yeah,
believe.
DC was involved early on, um, for the whole thing, pretty much, um, because they had expertise in doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and having them involved gave it a certain amount of prestige. And the feeling was from the very beginning we wanted it to look and feel like a real comic book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was fortunate enough in the first few years that I worked on it to work with Marty Pasco, who was my editor at DC, and he's a very well-known comic writer. Did a lot of work on Superman, and he was terrific. Taught me a lot about writing for the medium, and I was fortunate enough to work with some really good artists.
Oh yeah.
I always remember sitting in Toys R Us in New York in 2002 with Marty and Carlos Tienda, and we had about 1,200 kids show up for the signing we were doing. And Marty turned to Carlos and said, "Well, enjoy this because you're never going to have this many kids turn out for something you work on ever again."
Oh. Ouch. Gosh dang. I mean, in all fairness, I don't know what Carlos Dad is up to right now, so.
Well, I mean, the fact is, it made sense though because kids don't read comic books. It's not aimed at them. It's aimed at college age and older now.
Yeah,
Has been
pretty
for
much.
years. So to have something that one of the things that excited DC about the project was that it was actually getting comic books in front of kids,
Mm-hmm.
and that maybe they might go read a DC comic when they got a little older. Then you
Yeah.
know.
No, I remember easily. Like, these were the first comic books I ever came into contact with. I mean, at the end of the day, I ended up being more of a Marvel fan, but still, I I'm awfully partial to those initial few comics, and I just distinctly remember the DC stamp. It's like it's right there. So I mean, they're not wrong. It definitely got. I'm. Gosh, have you read the book Brick by Brick?
No.
Okay. Really entertaining book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Obviously, it's about Lego, and they have like this little excerpt. They have an entire chapter about Bionicle, and they talk about how at one point in '03, the Bionicle comics were in higher circulation than both Batman and Superman.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we had a circulation of probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 million.
Yeah.
So we were the most widely circulated comic book in the world for a long
Goodness.
time because it was going out to every club member, and we had millions and millions of club members.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was in a lot of hands.
Yeah.
Um, it was in a lot of hands, and it was a lot of fun to work on. Always
Mm-hmm.
that project never got old. It never got dull. It never became something that was a job. It was always fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I was doing that at home because it wasn't part of my regular job. Um, but it was always a joy to work on those.
No, I can imagine. I know obviously it was a joy to read them. It was I for a lot of like I don't think I know anyone in my social sphere that hasn't been affected by not only the comics, but like the novels you wrote in some way. Like the trajectory of their life is just totally altered and shaped because of the comics and the novels. And it's amazing, honestly.
Well, it's still weird for me to run into people who are out of college and married and they have kids and they grew up reading my books. I'm like, that's freaky. Um, that makes you feel old.
Oh,
But I've had a few people tell me that they became writers because they read my books, and it's like that's very flattering.
it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's very flattering, and the big thing I always tried to do, and fortunately I had a terrific editor in Fiona Simpson who backed me up, was I never wrote down to people.
Mm-hmm.
My attitude was, if they don't know this word, they can go look it up.
Yeah.
But I was not going to write down. I mean, there were things I obviously couldn't do because it was Lego, and you just didn't do them when you're writing for kids.
Of course.
But beyond that, I did not ever get restrained from doing what I was doing in terms of the characterization or any of that. And we treated the kids like they were mature grown-ups, and I think they appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think so. But I mean, sir, where's the obscenities? I really think Bionicle could have used.
Well,
a few
that's one of the things that I kind of missed about writing for grown-ups, because in my old books prior to Lego, the bodies were just stacked like cordwood. I kind of missed that.
Yeah, I mean, in the meantime, Tuyet did get cut in half, so I think we're balanced out.
I tried to sneak stuff in where I could. It was easier after the Baraka because they were so extreme.
Oh gosh.
Even I thought they were too dark. I liked being dark.
I don't know if I'd call them dark, but I would definitely call the marketing bizarre. Is the kindest word I'll use. Okay, maybe you'd be able to elaborate. Who was the demographic for that?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I wasn't involved in that end.
It just seems so bizarre. It's like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go with gangs. That'll get people talking. It seemed so bizarre to me, and I'm not a fan of rap, so I was not on board. But
yeah, they were fun characters though.
They were. Oh yeah.
And the 2007 villains were fun too.
Oh gosh. Okay, I gotta ask you this. I've had a lot of conversations about the merits of 06 and 07 from both set perspectives and story perspectives. Like, it's very popular. 06 is a very popular year. A lot of people really, really, really like it. I'm awfully partial to 2007. I think emotionally it hit a lot harder. Downfall is just... I love Downfall. It's a really great book. Do you have a preference to either 2006 or 2007?
I don't know that I had a preference, but I did enjoy 2007 only because the villains were so much fun to write.
Mm-hmm.
They had such an interesting backstory to them. Whereas the Paraka were fun too. There was nothing wrong with them, but they were a little bit more evil for the sake of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of just thug-like.
Whereas the whole notion of you were essentially conquerors and kings, and then you got sent to prison, and now you've gotten out, but you're stuck in the ocean, and that was just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
To me, but the whole Mask of Life saga was a lot of fun, I thought, and it was the first time we had really tried to do almost like a trilogy like that, and I was very happy with the way it went.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no.
But of course, the ending changed quite a bit.
Really?
Because we were in the midst of, I think it was 07, probably 07, when the decision got made that we were waking Motunui up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole ending for '08 had to change because Matanui had to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the whole notion of, well, Makuta has a master plan that is about taking over the robot. And that's really where that came from. So,
Okay. That that is something. I was recently in a conversation with someone, and we were talking about the Matoran universe kind of popping up and how that ended up, being kind of explained through the Mutran Chronicles and Makuta's Guide to the Universe. And Mutran goes to Tren Chrome and he finds out something, and he goes back to Pterodax. He's like, "Let's do this," and Pterodax is like, "Let's do that." Um, what I kind of keyed in on a lot of the wording. You were very I don't know if this was intentional, but it seemed like it was very specific wording in that Makuta wanted to overthrow like Matanui as not only a concept but eventually literally, and he just wanted Matanui at first. He's like, yeah, I'll deal, and then eventually wanted to overtake and just completely control. What Butrin found out, was it just how to down the Matanui robot, or did he like learn the secret at that point that it existed?
well, I think at that point, that was really that they got even if they had suspected, that's when they got the confirmation, and that's when Pterodax realized that there was a way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were talking before the show started about Time Trap, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons that's my favorite book is the fact that I had the freedom to totally change Makuta's character.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and this comes up in comic books all the time, that it's very hard to be the big, sinister, ultra powerful, scary villain if you lose constantly.
Yeah.
Because after a while, it starts to become, well, yeah, but you never win, so how powerful are you? And that's when I really got into this whole notion of he has plans on top of plans on top of plans, and he loses on purpose so that you think you've won. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're not paying attention to what he's actually doing.
Yeah.
And I just loved that whole idea of him playing six-dimensional chess all the time. And just being so much smarter than anybody thought he was. And that's why I love that book. And I still can enjoy reading that book now because I just love the way. And I can't even take credit for that because I sort of pushed him in that direction and then the character just ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always felt like that was one of the couple of things that I changed in Bionicle or affected in Bionicle that made a difference. Because I don't think his character would have had staying power if it just kept being him making big pronouncements and then losing in the end.
Yeah. He lost no 1, he lost no 3, lost no 4 or 5. Oh, okay. 05-ish. But yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, it worked, it helped. A lot of people will say that Pterodax is not only really well written, but in comparison to a lot of other villains, is really consistent in his oh gosh, I can't even figure out the word. Now, this is why I'm not a writer. But it's just he's very methodical and very well structured as a character.
Yeah, and he thinks ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And he understands the Toa. He understands the way they think. He understands what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And he understands the fact that, if they think they've won, they're going to go back home and have a.
Yeah.
And while they're celebrating, he can work on what he's actually working on.
Yeah.
But they're not. What he knows, what he understands about the Toa, and to a lesser extent about the Turaga, is that they are not devious characters by nature.
Mm-hmm.
They're honest. They value trust and loyalty and things like that. And people like that are never going to be able to figure out what he's doing.
Yeah.
Because they just don't think like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think that it really, really added to Pterodax as a concept. So, because I remember I was talking to Alistair Swinnerton about the early days of Makuta, and he was talking about making Makuta more of a like almost a concept, almost like I haven't. Okay, so I haven't watched the show Lost. Have you seen Lost?
Yeah, I've seen most.
Okay, I have not. I know that there's a black cloud in Lost, but in that
Yes.
sense, I'm gonna like say so. Early on, the impression I got from Mr. Swinnerton was that Pterodax initially was kind of this ethereal cloud that was more of a concept that pushed people in a certain direction. Like, oh, hey, listen, you can just destroy this. You can do it. I'm in everyone. I am the embodiment of destruction, and well, guess what you can do. And I think that's an interesting direction, but I've got a little more of a bias toward what he ended up being, which is this very well thought out, methodical, calculating person. Because it made him more tangible.
Yeah, and he was a fun character. I mean, you know, he felt he was totally justified in whatever he was doing, and I think that that's also important to convey because evil people don't think of themselves as evil.
Yeah. You're the protagonist of your own story at all times.
Exactly, and his feeling was, I'm better suited to run this than he is, so I should be the one running it.
Yeah.
And to him, that made perfect sense, and therefore he was justified in doing. And I think also, to some extent, he looked at it as like, well, if Montanui is so incompetent that I was able to put him to sleep in the first place, he's obviously not competent enough to run the universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would be hard to argue with that.
Maybe not after the end. He did kind of... He had a little bit of a headache toward the end there. But, yeah, no. I thought... Gosh, I thought that the twist was honestly really excellent. So, but... If any of my BSO1 friends are listening, just I would do a little bit of a look over on your Pterodax page, because the reason I actually asked that outside of the conversation was like it specifies on the page. It's like, oh, while he was trapped in like that Toa seal, he's like, I wonder if Matanui's a giant robot. But it seems a little more set up that he learned it a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But now, in regards to general writing again. What is something that you started writing, you got through working on a project, and then you thought back, is like, maybe I would have done this differently. What are some instances that you can think of situations where you would have gone back and changed it, knowing what you know now, you wish you knew then?
I can't really think of too many, simply because the luxury of even doing a second draft did not exist on most of the Lego related stuff that I've done, because there just was no time.
Mm-hmm.
You had to get it right first time. And I mean, there were things within the overall Bionicle story and structure that I would have done differently if I'd been in charge of it, but I wasn't, so there wasn't anything I could do about it. I mean, I probably would not have done a 1,000-year flashback in a third year without warning people somehow, because we had an awful lot of kids that thought that Taraga turned into Toa.
Mm-hmm.
We confused the heck out of everybody in 2004, and I think there was probably a better way to have handled that. And that's on me as much as anybody else, because obviously I wasn't making it clear enough in what I was doing.
Yeah.
And my issues with the Hordika story are well documented.
Oh yeah.
There's no real reason to go into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and I made it very clear I was vehemently opposed to waking up Montanui when we did, but got outvoted. Oh yeah, I argued passionately against that. I felt that we could get many, many years more story out of Montanui still being asleep, and that there was no reason to take the risk of doing that. But I got outvoted, and then I came back and said, okay, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we have it be that he wakes up, but Makuta takes him over, and then we have a real dark universe going on for a while. And fortunately, they went along with that idea.
Goodness, I've never known about that, because yeah, I always thought it was like really well timed. I thought that speaking of time, I suppose that's one thing that a lot of people are very critical about when it comes to the Bionicle story, is that all of its history takes place over hundreds of thousands of years, but then 01 to maybe 10 is about a year and a half. And
Yep.
I know you've actually talked. I don't really have that. I used to kind of agree on that in the sense that, well, there's a lot of time. Oh gosh, someone once said, I don't remember who. I think it was another author, but someone said, if you feel like your time frames are too long, take off a 0. Until you said something, I think, on the message boards, which kind of hit a string with me. That's not the right phrase, but you know what I'm saying. And is that with all that time, it allows people to fill in the blanks themselves and role play and make stories in between these events.
Right.
And I think that, once I heard you say that, it made a lot of sense, and it also kind of clicked, like, that's why I really like 01, because there's not a whole lot of solid story content, and I can just fill in the blanks.
Right.
Is that something you find yourself doing with other works that you've worked on, like, heck, even your own works, your personal works, or say, well, I'm gonna say maybe not Ninjago, obviously, but something like Legends of CHIMA, which I think you were a little more involved in.
I wasn't that involved in it.
Okay.
I mean, that stuff was aimed pretty young.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I didn't have anything to do with universe creation at all on that. So I really can't say that I did very much that I feel was impactful when it comes to CHIMA.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I kind of looking at it as sort of like, if you look at Game of Thrones, I mean, you had X number of years of the show, but how much time actually went by in the story from the beginning to the end?
Mm-hmm.
How much time actually went by in the universe? And so, you can't. If you're going to have a situation, you can't really have your heroes sitting around for 3 years not doing anything.
Yeah.
It does have to be one thing on top of another on top of another. Because we just, it was hard. I mean, it was hard enough to explain the flashback. How are we going to explain, 5 years have gone by since that story we ended last month?
Yeah. Yeah. No, again, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I kind of favor that, and I especially favor the amount of sandbox that is given through all these large time spans. For what it's worth, I haven't watched Game of Thrones. So when you say, how much time has actually happened, heck if I know. I haven't read the novels, haven't watched the show, and I don't have any plans to after what I heard the ending ended up being. Boy.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I used to do a lot of times with Bionicle was write the ending first.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that was that I was on a word count. I really couldn't go over 20,000. And I didn't want to get to the end and not have enough room to end the story correctly. So if I wrote the ending first, I knew how many words I had to do the setup.
Yeah.
And I read a lot, and I have to say that one of the things that you run into over and over and over and over again, both in genre fiction and non-genre fiction, is nobody knows how to write an ending.
Yep. Yes.
A lot of books just stop; they don't really end, or else there's this huge build-up. And I mean, Stephen King used to say that he knew that his endings were never going to work because once you reveal the monsters, people stop being scared. He used to tell this story about, you could have a book where it's somebody's in a house and there's something scratching on the door and scratching on the door and scratching on the door, and that your whole book is scratching on the door. And then you open the door and it's a 10-foot cockroach. He says, and everybody will scream. But then the next minute they're going, well, at least it's not a 15-foot cockroach, and they're not scared anymore. So he didn't even bother trying to do good endings. And a lot of people they just don't. And you get to the end of the book and you're like, what did I read this for? Because this is not an ending. So I've always felt it was very important that you have to give a satisfying ending.
Yeah.
And I think I managed to do that for the most part. But there were definitely books where I said, okay, this is going to have a complicated ending. It's going to have a big battle at the end. I better make sure I do it first.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise I'm going to get to the end, I'm going to have 3,000 words left, and I'm not going to fit the whole thing, and it's going to feel rushed.
Yeah. No, I think that's also something that is endings and Lego themes are not exactly an analogous pairing. Because most Lego story themes usually end without a conclusion. Exo-Force, Hero Factory. Well, it had like 5 different cliffhangers, so it doubly so. And you'll often find that some of the ones that do have endings are either generally really solid, or it's like, well, at least it had an ending. Legends of CHIMA comes to mind. I'm not personally a big fan of the theme. I didn't like the show very much. I've been very vocal about that. I'm sorry, Tommy Anderson! But it had an ending. It had a conclusion. And Ninjago's still going. And of course, then there's Bionicle. There are a few trains of thought to Bionicle and how it ended overall. I would argue that it had a conclusion, and it just had a continuation afterwards. You know, the 2 serials, the 3 serials you ended up doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way I always looked at Bionicle was I never looked at it as having had an ending. I just looked at it as we're not telling the stories anymore. But it's not that they're not happening. Mm-hmm. We're just not telling them. Mm-hmm. But, that universe, even before 2009, was so rich, so huge, and there was so much of it we hadn't explored yet. And I kind of look at it the same way that I look at original Star Trek. I mean, that ended after 3 years, but the stories didn't stop, and eventually they turned them into books. Yeah. But, before that, it was fan fiction for years and years and years. And I don't believe that the story ended in Bionicle. We just stopped telling it. Mm-hmm. But if they turned around to me tomorrow and said, hey, pick up where you left off, and, we want to do another series of original Bionicle, I could start it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
I love that universe.
Yeah, same. But yeah, no, I agree. I think that, well, personally, I like where Bionicle, the mainstream Bionicle, concluded in a sense. I thought, because I'm a sucker for symbolism and parallelism. So when starts off, Tahu's on the beach, and he's like, oh, dang, I'm on a beach. And then at the end, that final illustration by, son of a bologna sandwich, I forget who. The final illustration of Tahu on the beach. And he's just saying, all right, guys, let's get going. I thought that was succinct. That was really excellent. I enjoyed that. Mm-hmm. Obviously enough, there are a lot of people who are very discontent with the fact that the other 2 serials did not finish. There's Samad's Tale, which I thought was really good. But that I figure that is a question we'll get to later, the serials and whatnot, but we'll leave it for then. So, but yeah, no, I get that train of thought. What, in your opinion, is a good ending? Well, what do you believe is, what is an ideal conclusion to a story, if any?
Well, I mean, I think that a story is like a piece of music, and if you're building up to a crescendo, there, gosh darn well, better be a crescendo. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's just flat. It's just, they get to the end and they feels like they just want to be finished with the book. They just want to be finished writing this book. Mm-hmm. And there is no real payoff. And of course, in a lot of cases now, people are writing books with an eye towards series, which means they're not going to change the character that much.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to go on that much of a journey because they have to be able to bring them back in pretty much the exact same way for the next book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've read a number of books that that just didn't work. But then once in a while, you'll run across one where they nail it.
Mm-hmm.
I just read a book called How to Lose the Time War, which was absolutely beautifully written. On my best day, I could not write something half as beautiful as this book was. And it had a very satisfying ending.
Let's see. How to Lose the Time War? Was that it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to have to look into that. Huh.
Just the writing, it's like, well, somebody described it as poetry masquerading as prose. and that really is what it is. It's just, I read this thing over, I said, I'm going to have to go buy a copy. So I got it out of the library.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, there are some books that you read that are good and they inspire you to go write because you're like, wow, I want to write something like this. There are other books that are so good that they inspire you not to write because they just make you feel so incredibly untalented.
Okay, I feel like I know a lot of artists who are like that. But I mean, I get that. That makes sense. On the subject of novels, what are some novels that you'd recommend to aspiring novelists or writers or people that are looking to get into things? They want the inspiration, not the kind of inspiration that makes them go, well, shucks, I'm never going to be able to do that, but the kind of inspiration that makes them go, heck yeah.
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I think it depends on where you feel your strength is and where you don't. I mean, for example, my strength has always been more dialogue than anything else, but I feel like maybe not always so much plotting. And so, like, I really enjoy reading stuff like John Dixon Carr because he totally understood how to plot. Mm-hmm. And his prose may be a little dated because those books are so old, but he always, he would create an impossible situation, but then when he resolved it, it made sense. Mm-hmm. Whereas I love reading Rex Stout for the dialogue. He was a master of dialogue and characterization, but when you get to the end of the book, it always felt like he just put all the names of the suspects in the hat and picked one out and said, okay, this is who the murderer is going to be. Because it never made any sense who the killer turned out to be at the end, because that wasn't what the book was about. The book was about the fun of reading about Nero Wolfe and Archie. It wasn't really about the mystery so much. So yeah, it really does, come down to what your taste is and where you feel you need to improve, but you're always going to get better by reading people who are better than you are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Iron sharpens
That's
iron.
what it comes down to. I mean, if you want to write horror, find a horror writer that is way better than you are. I mean, and the interesting thing, I think, with horror too is a lot of times with those writers, they'll write one book that will absolutely just blow you away, and then the next 4, terrible. I think writing horror in particular is like relief pitching. It's very hard to repeat your emotion, and it's very hard to be consistent. I mean, there was one writer whose name escapes me, but he did a marvelously claustrophobic book a couple of years ago, and then his next book came out. I was like, oh, I can't wait to read this because the first one was so good, and it was terrible. And the next book that came out was terrible too, because he just wasn't able to repeat what he did the first time. Some people have one story in their head, and they tell it, and then they don't really have any other stories to tell. It's the same with characters. There was a wonderful scene in Jeremy Levin's book Creator about a writer who creates a character named Parnash, and Parnash dies at the end of the book that he writes, and then every other book that he writes, regardless of who the main character is, it's always Parnash again. And he keeps killing him. He keeps killing him in different ways at the end of the book, and he's still back for the next book. It doesn't matter if he's writing about a Saint Bernard. It doesn't matter what he's doing. It's always the same guy. And it finally ends up that the writer winds up in a mental institution and escape from his character.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Huh. What was the name of that book?
It's a book called Creator. It came out back in the 70s.
Okay. Yeah.
And I liked it, even though it starts out very rough and sort of tempting to stop reading it. I like it because it addresses the whole fundamental issue of, is the writer writing the book or is the character writing the book?
Mm-hmm.
And it gets very much into the whole notion of the character refusing to do things that the writer wants them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that perspective, coming at it from that, that's awfully understandable. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that. I don't read enough variant books. Oh gosh, I started a long time ago. I started Pet Sematary by Stephen King, and I remember the movie, the first movie. I remember really enjoying the movie, and I went to go read the book, and I just couldn't finish it. I got started, couldn't finish it, but I want to.
I always felt that was his best book because he was just telling a story and he was really reaching back to like classic Grimm's Brothers kind of feeling to it. Mm-hmm. Monkey's Paw kind of, really paying homage to the classics. The problem I always had with King's work was that, he would be building up a mood and building up a mood and building up a mood, and then all Pepsi, Michael Jackson. He'd be like throwing in all of these timely references and taking you completely out of the mood you were in. Mm-hmm. Plus, it means the stuff's going to get dated.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can still read Turn of the Screw. You can still read Haunting of Hill House. But in 20 years, is anybody going to be reading his stuff? Because they're not going to understand any of those references.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't imagine. I haven't seen any of for instance, the It movies. I haven't seen any of them. Mm-hmm. But I can imagine it's probably a different experience watching like the current ones, the one that came out like a couple of years ago and the one that's coming out this year, as opposed to reading the novel, because they were just made in two completely different times.
Yeah. Yeah, and what scares people changes. Mm-hmm. I mean, he dealt with that in Danse Macabre, which is there's a lot of, when you start getting into the social subtext of horror and when it's successful, when it's not, and what the types are based on the era it was made in. It's really fascinating stuff. I mean, when you see the difference between what they were doing in the 40s as opposed to what they were doing in the 50s, as opposed to what they were doing in the 60s and the early 70s, and then you start comparing it to what was going on in the country politically at that time, you really can see very strong correlation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of writing from the surroundings in a sense.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, it tends to be when times are good, people will go to horror movies. Because there's that sort of unsettled, like, well, it's not going to stay good. But when times are bad, they don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, the real heyday of Universal Horror before World War II. Mm-hmm. Once the war started, those movies were not doing as well anymore because people were seeing real-life horrors. They didn't need to go to the horrors. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the biggest change, and I know we're kind of getting off track here.
Oh, no, it's all on track. We're good.
The biggest change in those kind of movies from, I would say, the 80s onward is that the traditional role of the horror movie was like a roller coaster ride. You went and you got scared and you got thrilled and you got stressed out, but at the end there was a resolution and order was restored, and you left the theater saying, okay, order is restored. Mm-hmm. But in the 80s was when they launched that whole notion of, oh, you think the monster's dead, but then the monster's not dead, and in the last scene he kills the person. And so order is not And that has become a trope of modern horror, that the monster's never really dead. And it's, I guess, maybe because they want to set up sequels, I don't know. But that became a trope of, well, you think it's over, but it's never actually over. So the stress is not actually relieved then.
Yeah.
And I've never been sure that that's necessarily a good thing, because it sort of defeats the purpose of what the horror film is supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's making a lot of sense, especially since I don't watch. I think I mentioned this. Either before we started or earlier on. I don't watch a lot of TV, and I also don't watch a lot of movies. But the last movie I saw was what had been described as a horror movie. It's called Crawl, if you've heard of it.
Yeah, the alligator movie, yeah.
Yeah. I would not call it a horror movie. I'd call it a thriller. I call it a suspense thriller because it's not really scary. It's more just kind of, it's very thrilling. But what you're saying is making a lot of sense, because you have this, the premise, you have the situation, you have the monster, which is the alligator, and then it goes through, and then, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie, but order is restored, and it makes a lot of sense. Gosh, I need to watch more horror movies.
Now, the interesting thing, though, is that what worked for decades in the movies for these kind of things was very different from what they did on radio. A lot of radio horror ended with things 5 times worse than they were at the beginning of the story. In fact, most radio horror did not end with a happy end.
Oh gosh.
And that stuff, I you were asking me at one point about books that people should read if they want to write. I really recommend listening to old radio, because that is the same as writing a book, in the sense that all they could do was conjure a picture in your mind. They didn't have special effects. They didn't have any way to visually impart anything. They had to be able to describe it, usually just through dialogue, to the extent that it would stick in your mind. And they did a wonderful job of letting you scare yourself. There's a wonderful old episode of, I believe it's Lights Out, that has to do with 2 women getting lost and winding up in a cabin with this guy. And they never see clearly what he looks like. And he basically tells them that, well, one of them has to die and the other one has to stay with him.
Oh, goodness.
And so it ends up, of course, that one of them does get killed, but the other one thinks, oh, I survived. And then he steps into the light and she sees what he looks like. And they never tell you what he looks like. All you hear is her scream. And that's the end of the story. So it's in your head what he looks like. And that's going to be infinitely more scary than anything that they could have done with a special effect.
Oh, man. No, that's a really good point.
And they did that all the time. I mean, they understood that it wasn't necessary to describe what it looked like. Because your mind could scare you better than anything that they could. And there is no horror movie, I don't think, where you don't get used to the monster. Especially if they're in the movie a lot. You get used to them. They don't scare you as much anymore because you get used to them. The brain adjusts to them. But if you can't see it and it's just in your imagination, which is how a good horror novel should work, you're going to scare the heck out of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's gosh dang. I really need to delve more into like good horror movies, horror novels as well, because I mean I don't get scared by them at all. Obviously, they're not very there's that disassociation, but I keep on thinking back to Crawl, and the point you're making is definitely applicable there, because at some point in the movie you're just kind of laughing because the alligators are a little goofy. Like they just alligator. One part in the movie is like an alligator grabs someone, and when an alligator grabs something that it intends to eat, it does a death roll. But this alligator is shaking the person right to left. They're like throwing them up against walls like it's some sort of a Terminator movie, and it's really goofy. And of course, you see the alligators quite often in the movie, all throughout the movie. So that's a really good point. I can definitely see that for something like It as well, because it's just clown.
I mean, everybody always says Jaws worked because you never saw the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, but I was introduced to the power of this sort of thing when I was quite young, because when I was probably like 10 or 11, I could pick up a radio station out of Philadelphia on Sunday nights, and they would do 3 hours of old radio. And they were doing an episode of Escape called Three Skeleton Key, about 3 guys on a lighthouse in a storm, and a boat crashes onto the rocks, and there's no people on the boat, just rats.
Mm.
And the rats swarm off the boat and are trying to get into the lighthouse. And they're like climbing up the walls, and when the light goes around, all you see is the rats pressed against the glass.
Oh,
and they had warned us before it started. They said, don't turn the lights out when you listen to this. So of course I turned the lights out. And so I get through the whole show, and I stand up to turn the radio off.
Oh no.
And I stepped on a bundled up sock on my bedroom floor and shot right through the ceiling. And I said, well, this works.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. See, I've always heard stories about like radio dramas, radio series, because my father used to listen to those as well. And I honestly don't think I've ever experienced one, which seems like a little bit of an oversight for someone who's an aspiring voice actor. You'd want to kind of know all those different medias and mediums. But that's really fascinating. Gosh, I wonder
if you only have time to listen to one, okay, I would recommend, and this is fairly easy to find. It's on free on Radio Archives on the web. An episode of Suspense called House in Cypress Canyon.
House in Cypress Canyon. There we go.
It's a very famous episode of the show. I've heard it at least a half a dozen times. It never gets old. Very unusual for that show, because it was a different kind of story than most of what they crime and mystery and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But it will stay with you. It will stay with you.
Okay, well, I'm down. I'm gonna have to give this a listen, because it sounds fascinating, and like I said, horror movies don't really they don't do anything to me, so I'm very curious about this one. So, whew, that's great. Did you watch any horror movies? Any ones that come out recently?
I don't watch any recent horror. I usually will read up on it so I know what story is and stuff, but I scare way too easily. Okay. So I tend to like old, or I'm a particular fan of Val Lewton's RKO movies. I Walked with a Zombie and Body Snatcher and Cat People, the original Cat People, that stuff, because he was sitting there with no budget at all and incredibly stupid titles that he had to write movies about. Because he had no choice about the title, and managed to create, a half a dozen classic films. And I always had a lot of respect, because he could have just put out schlock and gotten away with it, and he didn't do it. He went the extra mile to put out things that are still classics.
Mm-hmm. Goodness, I've heard of Body Snatchers. I've not heard of the other two.
Body Snatcher is probably one of Boris Karloff's best films. And I know it was one he really loved working on. Mm-hmm. I Walk with a Zombie is a really good film. It's basically Jane Eyre with zombies.
Huh.
And Original Cat People was really good. Curse of the Cat People is more of a fairy tale. It's a much gentler film. It wasn't really a sequel. It was a very different feel of a film. And then Seventh Victim is just dark and depressing.
Oh, I think I'm good. I'm good. But fair enough. No, I really need to delve more into these because like I always I tell my fellow associates like they some of the others they really like horror movies as well, which is obviously why Crawl came up. And while I definitely I don't see a lot of them. Like I haven't seen some classical. Like would you call a Thing a horror movie?
Which one?
The
original?
Yes, I'm gonna go with yes.
The Howard Hawks version or the Kurt Russell version?
Let me see, because there's one I'm thinking of, but let me double check. 1982.
Okay, well that's yeah, I would call it a horror film because modern horror is basically about grossing you out.
Fair enough.
The original Thing was more of a science fiction film. And the original version was terrific.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
That's another one I've seen a bunch of times.
I've never seen it. I've seen clips. Never seen it.
Well, the great moment in that film is before you see the monster, because once you see the monster, he's not that scary at all. But the whole scene where he's still in the block of ice, and the guy doesn't want to be in there with the block of ice with the alien inside of it, so he throws a blanket over it, so we won't have to see it, not realizing that it's an electric blanket that's turned on. And all you see is the water dripping and the water dripping and the water dripping. And you know what's going to happen, But that's just a marvelous moment. But yeah, once you actually see what he looks like, you're like, yeah, that's not scary,
Yeah. Yeah, because then, like you said, you just adjust to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Have you, I'm not familiar with the works that you've done prior to Lego or anything else, but have you done horror? Any novels like that?
Well, yeah, two of the books were basically mystery horror stories that I did. Hell's Feast and Demon's Dream were both set in I basically sort of said, well, if you took a D&D-ish kind of a universe where magic is very much a thing, what would its 1930s look like? And so that was the universe of Blood Shadows that I created for the role-playing game, and then those two novels were based off of that. So you had, vampires standing in bloodlines to get day-old blood, and you had a lot of magic being used so commonly that it wasn't a big deal. It was just standard that's what you would do. And that was a very fun universe to write in. I was supposed to do a third book for it, and then the game got canceled, so I didn't get a chance to do it, which is a shame because I really still sometimes wish I could write that book and wrap that story up.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Would you give it an ending, or would the story continue?
Well, I would have given the main character an ending. It was going to be a sad ending, but it was going to be an ending.
Fair enough. Fair. Hey, ending is an ending. Unless we're talking about Last Jedi. Oh gosh! How could I forget? I have to ask you. We'll need to move on to questions in just a moment here, but I have got to ask. Have you seen The Last Jedi?
No.
Oh, okay, never mind.
No, the last Star Wars movie I saw was the second of the prequel.
Oh no!
And and I haven't seen any of them.
Okay.
I've always been much more of a original Star Trek person.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair.
And not next gen, not the stuff that followed, but I have not seen anything of the new show yet. I want to see that. I own the first season, but I haven't watched it yet.
Okay.
But I was never that big of a fan of the shows. But I was always a big fan of original series. I grew up watching that with my dad. So.
Have you seen any of the J.J. Abrams films? Any of the?
I saw the first two.
Okay.
Those. I was pretty okay with the first one. I didn't like the second one. I've never gotten around to the third one.
Fair enough. You've seen more of them than I have. I saw the first one. I have not seen the latter two. So that's fair. But yeah, no, I was gonna ask because like I like I said, don't see a lot of movies, but the movies that I do see of the Star Wars films I've seen, I think that there are worse films. I think that The Phantom Menace is particularly bad, or at least maybe not even bad, but boring, just really boring to me. But I think that The Last Jedi is awful, just very inconsistent from a character perspective. But that's a whole spiel. But definitely don't recommend it. Okay, so would you be open to some email questions that we have?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, so I'd just like to preface all this to the people listening that have sent in questions. Some of them are simply not applicable. Some of you have asked about set design. Some of you have asked about comic artwork. They're not going to be applicable here. Mr. Farshtey, if you would describe one more time what your involvement in LEGO is now and has been.
Well, like I said, I run the magazine. I was Bionicle, writing the comics, and I was writing the books, and I was a part of the story team, not in charge of the story team. And, some of the stuff that we did was my idea. Some of the stuff that we did was not. And that's the way a good story team works. A story team, if it's working correctly, when at the end of the day you should not be able to say whose idea it was, because I can tell you right now, working with the really talented people that I work with, there's not an idea I ever threw out that they didn't make better.
Yeah, no, I think that does a really succinct job of summarizing everything. I think that's good. So again, everyone, keep that in mind. So if I skip some things, that's why. Okay. First question. This is actually from my friend Tyler. You've spoken to him before, actually. So he has two questions, and I'm going to harken back to my earlier mention of the serials. Question number 1. What were the reasons behind the story serials ceasing production? Was there a lack of free time to write them in between your actual work for LEGO, a lack of personal interest, a request by LEGO not to write G1 stories while G2 was being developed, or a combo of the above?
Well, G2 had nothing to do with it. G2 wasn't even a glint in anybody's eye at the time that I was doing the serials. Because G2 wasn't until, when was that? 2014, 2015, something like that?
That seems to line up, yeah.
Yeah, so that was way after that period. No, it was really a case of they mainly had me doing them so that they could keep the trademarks active.
Really?
Yeah, because, and I mean, if you look at Marvel Comics, same thing. They'll bring characters that are kind of obscure back every year or two, usually a couple of years, because if they don't, they're going to lose a trademark.
Oh, that's right. Hey, I
don't know if you remember, you probably wouldn't remember this, but way back when, on the little news page in the Marvel Comics, they used to have a little comic strip that Fred Hembeck would do. And it was just a goofy little, comic. It wasn't anything important, but he would bring in characters like Brother Voodoo into his comic strip because that counted as keeping the trademark.
Okay.
So that's why you'd see a lot of obscure characters show up in his little comic strip, because that was Marvel's way of being a trademark. But it was really a combination of not having as much time to do them, and going online and seeing that there was virtually no reaction to the chapters at all.
Really?
And it really kind of felt like nobody really cared anymore. And of course, once I stopped, then people cared. But at the time, it just, I wasn't seeing any ripple from any of it. And I think also there was, for me, a certain amount of real sadness at that time because I felt so bad about the line ending. So I think part of me maybe felt like I needed to break away from it because it was hard to get over it ending. because that had been, I mean, that was like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of my life for an awful lot of years.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes perfect sense. It's like that's a huge part of not only your schedule, but your day to day, and it just gets
I mean, at
thrashed.
the time, that G2 was being discussed, I did talk to people about should I wrap the G1 serials up
Mm-hmm.
before you launch G2, and there just was no interest in
Oh,
doing that. And of course, once G2 was out, there's no way you're going to do one story because it would
yeah,
confuse everybody.
yeah. Then it's
But
conflicting.
I mean, I feel I'm not going to sit here and say I don't feel bad about that because I feel like I let fans down
Mm-hmm.
um, with that, and but it was just a case of I was going through an awful lot personally at that time too,
Mm-hmm.
and I just felt like I wasn't giving it the attention it deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was going to be the last thing we did for Bionicle, I didn't want it to be something that was poor quality.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there are a myriad of people who are very disgruntled by some of the directions things are going, specifically with the Red Star. But I have a hunch that it was going in a direction people weren't anticipating. But
Well, you got to keep in mind that the Red Star was one of those established early on, like very beginning, with no explanation for what it was.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so we knew it was important. We knew it served some purpose. We had no idea what that purpose was because it was never detailed in the story Bible what that purpose was.
Yeah, I think at some point it was described as like
So,
a jetpack.
so I just sort of figure it's one of those things where I could have done something completely, totally different with it, and people would still have been unhappy. Just
Mm-hmm.
a different group of people.
Oh yeah,
It was one
yeah.
of those things I think that people would almost rather had never been explained.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're doing as many stories and books and comics and serials as I was doing at that time, you want everything to sink in. You're trying to use every element of the story you possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I honestly think from an in-story perspective, it made a lot of sense. Because you want to have a way to recycle people. For the functioning robot. I think the biggest issue I think anyone would take with it, and I agree with this train of logic, is from a narrative perspective, bringing back people who had died in story and had these dramatic moments like Lee Khan or okay, maybe not Nocturne, but people that have died in certain pivotal moments, and then they exist again, runs contrary to the drama and the suspense.
It does, and that's a very good point. But because the serial did not finish, I did not get to um, fully explain it
I suspect it was going in a place that a lot of people would have gone
because
like, oh.
the thing was, um, as with most things having to do with Mononui, was put together so quickly, it doesn't work very well. So
Yeah.
yes, they bring them back, but that doesn't mean that they survive very long after they've been brought back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
I,
so there would have ended up being a twist so that we didn't end up with all those characters running around as a normal part of the.
yeah. I kind of assumed that
Um,
when you said that you wanted to do
it
a
it
zombie on
it
a
either would
satellite.
have ended up being a case um, of simply a breakdown, or else I would have.
Well, what was that? You said a breakdown or?
It either would have ended up being a simple case of they break down and disintegrate after a certain amount of time, or it would have been the notion of, yes, they're artificial and yes, they have AI, but we also know they're capable of complex emotion, complex loyalty, complex friendship, things that AI is not normally capable of.
Mm-hmm.
So, do they have a spirit?
Mm-hmm.
And does that spirit still exist when you bring them back?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't still exist, then what are they?
Yeah. And gosh, yeah. See, I suspected because you had mentioned somewhere that you really wanted to write like a zombies on a satellite story. And
Yeah.
so initially there's like a lot of outrage from people. They're like, what? All these characters are back now? And Mavra's there? And Likan is there? And you know, everyone's... And
Yeah, but they wouldn't have stayed.
Yeah.
By the end of that serial, that would have been resolved. Not have, for the exact same reason you're articulating.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought so. But fair enough. But that actually is a good bridge into the next question from Tyler, who asks, with the recent precedent set by LEGO employees for writing and releasing Ninjago story serials on Twitter for fans to read, i.e. Tommy Anderson's Way of the Departed, would you ever consider returning to Bionicle to continue writing in the G1 world, especially now that G2 has concluded and wouldn't confuse general audiences?
If LEGO would let me, I probably would.
Awesome.
Simply because of the fact that I have at least some free writing time at this point. Mm-hmm. Most of the stuff that I'm doing is not stuff I'm doing under contract, so I don't have a set time I have to have it done by. And enough time has passed that I can write in the universe and feel nostalgic for it and not sad that it's over. Mm-hmm. But I have no idea. I don't know where I would publish it, and I don't know whether LEGO would have any. Because the thing is, Tommy can write Ninjago stories and basically approve them himself.
That's a good point.
Because of what his role is in the company. Mm-hmm. There isn't anybody to approve Bionicles. Mm-hmm. Because it's not an active line. Yeah. So I don't know how that would work. But personally, I mean, I wish that they would go back and do a novel series for it again. There's still so many stories to tell in that universe.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be the kind of thing... You mentioned publishing. And obviously my first gut reaction is to be like, the TTV message boards. Because like you've posted The Many Deaths of Toa 2 yet on BZ Power. And I think a few other things on like BZ Power as well. And now that you have the ability to be on a form like TTV, that's my gut reaction. But it would almost kind of be an interesting thing to see. Like, I would imagine it's kind of like a Lego Life, Lego Club like edition. Like, oh, here's the story of the week. But I'm obviously...
Well, the thing is, they're not going to do something like that on the app because people don't want to read a lot of text on an app.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
You know, it would have to be up on a website, and there's not that much being done with that right now. Mm-hmm. But you know, that's basically the issue. Is that one, there's no venue. Two, LEGO might or might not care at this point since they're not doing anything with the franchise. Mm-hmm. But I would assume they'd still want to have some kind of approvals done, and I'm not sure how much they want to invest in doing that for a line that isn't active. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really benefit LEGO any to promote something where they're not selling toys.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. They sell products, not stories, but I like the stories. So, no, I understand. Okay, fair enough. That's like been a long-standing question a lot of people have really been curious about, so it's good to have the insight on that. Okay, next question is from Petrus, who asks, with other LEGO employees like Nick Voss engaging with the community and sneaking Bionicle references in the newer sets, has LEGO as a company loosened up on your interactions with us? For example, are you now allowed to comment on the state of the community?
Well, I mean, I was never asked to comment on the state of the community. I don't know anything about the state of the community, frankly.
Fair. That's all right.
The only restriction I was ever put under, besides obviously common sense restrictions, is that I could not post on a site that didn't have age verification. Mm-hmm. And that's why Kelly and I had to leave BZ Power, which broke our hearts, frankly, because of that. But other than that, I've never had I took the social media course. I got my social media license at LEGO, so that's why I can post where I am posting. Mm-hmm. But I've never had a restriction as far as what I could answer, except in some cases I either don't remember or the questions are about things I wasn't involved with. Mm-hmm. But I really don't have a clue what the state of the community is.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough. Spidey Central asks, what was your favorite theme besides Bionicle to write for? And I also want to thank you dearly for writing Bionicle the way you did, elevating it from a generic kid's toy to something special.
Well, let's see. Ninjago was a lot of fun to write for when I was doing the graphic novels. Um, Monster Hunters was fun to write.
Oh, you wrote for Monster Hunters?
Well, in the magazine, yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
I didn't do much writing for superheroes. Most of that was that work. But there have been various themes that I've worked on that were fun, and some that went in directions I didn't expect. But I got to do a lot of fun things with the Jago stuff. I was doing the graphic novels because I had a lot of freedom with those early books. And and surprisingly enough, the Hero Factory ones were a lot of fun too. Because when I did those, I said, you know what, I'm going to do mashups. So I did like Magnificent Seven meets Night of the Living Dead in one of those books, just because I felt like it. I had restrictions with those. There were things I couldn't reveal of the main plot, but those were just plot. They really didn't have any characterization. So it was really just this exciting thing happens, and then this exciting thing happens, and then this exciting thing happens, and it was just go. It was just sit down, write, and go. And they were fun. I enjoyed those.
Fair enough. I've heard really good things about the HF books. I've never gosh dang, what the bean burrito? I totally spaced on the word read. I've never read any of the HF books, but I've heard really good things about them. So that's fair. I feel like to a degree the quality really starts to show in a novel if you're having fun with it. So all right.
Yeah.
Okay, Leo Zander asks, firstly, please convey to Mr. Farshtey my utmost gratitude for providing such delightful stories and giving me a love of storytelling. And second, my first question is, what are his favorite science fiction novels, and what classics of the genre would he recommend?
I haven't read a lot of science fiction, really. I mean, I read old Star Trek novels just because it's like reading comic books. It's just fun. I read Ray Bradbury. I always liked Ray Bradbury. Trying to think if there was anybody else that I read a lot of. I never was a real heavy science fiction reader.
Fair enough. I can't think of any off the top of my head either.
I mean, I wrote a science fiction book, but it's basically just a Western. I mean, when I was writing it, I did. When I was writing it, I was playing the soundtrack from Hang 'em High behind me when I was working on it. And interestingly enough, my first wife read it and told me it was the most depressing thing she'd ever read in her life.
Oh my god!
And I said, no, it's not. I said, everybody didn't die. One person, he ended up insane at the end, but he's alive. Come on.
Oh my gosh. I don't know what to take away from that.
That's how I used to write.
Oh my goodness. Do you still write with music? Like, I know you like, you mentioned you like jazz. Do you still like
having I sometimes will, depending on what I'm writing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When I was doing that, mostly was when I was still living at home, and so I needed to sort of drown out distractions. But I don't do it as much anymore. I do it a little bit here and there. I've tried it, but sometimes the music itself ends up being a distraction. So
yeah, fair. No, I understand that. Okay. His second question is, I am aware from prior questions that you worked on role-playing games in the past, but what have been
Yes.
your experiences playing them, and have any of those experiences influenced your novels?
Uh, well, yeah. I mean, I would say they would have to, because one of the things that you have to do when you're editing a role-playing game is you have to make sure it balances,
Mm-hmm.
and that basically usually refers to the numbers to make sure the numbers balance. But it also applies to any other kind of story you're doing. For example, one of the role-playing games we did was based on Brian Lumley's Necroscope series.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to have to read those books to work on the game. And what I discovered was most of those books would consist of 500 pages of "this is the absolute worst monster ever. Oh my god, you're never gonna be able to. Oh my god!" And then the hero would wipe it out in a page and a half because he was so ridiculously overpowered that there was no way anything's gonna be able to stop him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you actually see that trend a lot in book series now. It's not enough that like this person can communicate with the dead. It has to also be that they're from the royal family of people who can communicate with the dead, and they're the most person who ever communicated with the dead. It's like, why can't it just be that they talk to the dead?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you make them so uber powerful, then the stories aren't any fun because they're never going to lose. There's no chance they're ever going to lose because they're just so powerful they can snap their fingers and it's all over with. You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, at that point, it becomes about the climb to get stronger and not necessarily about
Yeah,
the
and I
journey.
mean, you kind of lose the ability to identify with the character if the character is automatically the best that there's ever been. Because how many people are the best that there's ever been?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense. That's why I think for the most part, power scaling in a lot of Lego properties works out decently well. I can't think of anything off the top of my head where it's just been so grotesque. I'm trying to think. Nothing's popping in my mind right now, but
But yeah, I mean, what I got out of role playing was you had to work fast. You had to be able to work in a lot of different genres. You might be Star Wars book one day and a Tales from the Crypt book the next day, and Indiana Jones the day after that.
mm-hmm.
You had to be able to come up with these adventures and really quickly and make them long enough that somebody'd want to keep playing and had a decent resolution to it. Um, and you were just working nonstop. You were writing constantly, and so it was a really good training ground because the best way to learn to write is to write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes all sense. Okay.
And I also learned that my math skills were really not that good. It was one of the first things that I worked on when I was at West End was a game which is enjoying a revival right now.
Oh, what was the name of the game?
And the guy that designed the magic system and really had designed the game was an MIT graduate.
Mm-hmm.
The magic system was really hard.
Oh no.
And so I was trying. This was very early days, and I was trying to come up with a spell using the magic system. And I worked really hard on it. And I went and showed it to him, and I said, "Is this right?" And he said, "Well, do you think it's right?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't even know what I'm doing."
Oh my gosh, I can relate as far as the math is concerned. That sounds like, oh gosh. I wouldn't even know where to start there. What was the name of the game again?
Torg.
Torg. Okay. Gosh. I can't even begin to fathom how you would begin to craft something like that, let alone interpret it. Whew.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. Leo's third and final question is, of the novelizations of the Bionicle movies you wrote, which one turned out the best in your opinion?
Of the novelizations of the movie, I don't know if any of them was really any better than any of the rest of them. I mean, on the one hand, those were the easiest books to write because you were just adapting the script. On the other hand, they were really hard books to write because you weren't really getting to do very much that was creative. It was just write out the dialogue that was in the story, write out the action scene that was in the story, and you also knew that by the time the movie came out, it wasn't going to match the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't really say that. I mean, those were like kind of like making sausage. There wasn't a lot of emotional investment in those books because it wasn't my story, it wasn't my dialogue. So I couldn't take a lot of personal pride in how they came out. And I mean, you really almost have to say, well, which of the 3 movies was the best, because then that'll probably have the best novelization.
Fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, next question's from Nathan. 2 questions. Let me see. Hang on. Okay. 1, due to its somewhat ornate design, was The Matanui's Guide to Bar Magna planned to be the final Bionicle book, or was it just kind of a special design?
Well, the thing is, that was an Amit book, if I recall correctly, and Amit always did high-quality, gorgeous books, Bionicle. Because the people who worked there really loved Bionicle, and you could see it in the effort they put in. I honestly don't remember if that book was written. That book was probably written before I knew Bionicle was being canceled.
Oh, wow.
Because it was September of 2008 that I found out that Bionicle was being canceled. So my guess is that book was written before that. Yeah.
Oh. Wow, that's way earlier than I thought, because I thought it was only like... I thought it was like 2009 you would have found out. No,
because we were starting planning for 2010. We were at a story meeting to start planning for 2010, because don't forget there was going to be a movie.
That's right.
For 2010.
Oh, yeah.
So you needed to have the story locked down early so they'd be able to do the movie. And so that's what we were in billing for, was for the first 2010 story meeting, and that's when we were told it was canceled.
Oh, okay. Wow. Today I learned. Well, I'm learning a lot today, so fair enough. Goodness. Okay. And also, I can definitely back him up on the ornate design, the quality claim, because I was recently graciously gifted a very kind gift from my friend Nick Voss. And it was it's an actual printed copy of Journey's End. It's obviously in Polish. I can't read it, but it is beautiful. All of the pages are super, super detailed, and it has all these little they have some pictures of the stars that they're nowhere else. Literally nowhere else. I've never seen them before. They're only in the book. So these books are really, really well done. So his other question was, if not, what other storylines post-2010 would you have wanted to make other than the online serials, if any?
I can't say I had anything specific in mind, but one of the things that I like about Bionicle, and I frankly think that it applies to a lot of classic fictional universes, is that you could do a story in virtually any genre. The universe was big enough to accomplish that. And I think that applies to Star Wars, it applies to Star Trek, it applies to a lot of different universes, that they are big enough to accommodate other genres. So it's possible that we might have gone and explored some of those. We might have done mysteries. We might have done scarier, darker stories. We might have done something that was much more lighter, just to experiment and see what people liked.
That makes a lot of sense. Fair. Okay. All right. In that case, oh gosh. So this next question. There are a few questions here, and it's sent in by Wolk. And this first one obviously is quite facetious, but is Spherus Magna flat?
No, Spherus Magna is not flat.
There you go.
I think the Spherus kind of gives it away.
What? No. I thought it was just a giant Kanoka disc flying through space. Okay, so next question is in regards... This was posted to the message boards, but I'll make it brief. A while back, some years ago, there was a contest BZ Power was running for... it was a writing contest. And of that...
Yes, I've seen this question. The issue for me is that all this stuff is minimum 10 years old.
Yeah.
I don't remember enough of the storyline to be able to say, yes, this works without contradicting things.
Mm-hmm.
I just frankly don't feel qualified at this point to be able to say, yes, this is going to work and it's not going to screw anything up anyplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main reason I have not wanted to do this.
That's fair. No, that makes a lot of sense.
The other thing is that, frankly, toward the end, every time I did canonize people, anything I got rocks thrown at me.
This is also true.
Because there's a lot of people that don't want anything new added. So for everybody who wants it, there's somebody else that doesn't. And I frankly got tired of doing it, so I stopped doing it.
Yeah. No, that's honestly very fair. And are you telling me you're not going to confirm the Shadowed One's name here? Oh, no. But yeah, no, I understand. The third question is in regards to an illustration by Stuart Sager from it was the last graphic novel, the original one. But obviously, since it's an illustration question, I don't really think you would have much to add on to that Stuart Sager hasn't commented on himself. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. This is from Ulti. Ulti asks a few things. Av Matoran each have unique light powers. When they combine with the Toa, would a Toa of light also have access to them by himself?
Can you repeat the question?
So Av Matoran each have a unique...
Oh, yes, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I would say yes, he would.
Excellent. Then, what was the process that melding Makuta used to shift toward light? And how long did it last?
Don't know.
All right. In the lore...
That's that falls under the heading, unfortunately, of if I didn't need to know to write the story I was writing, I didn't spend the time.
That's fair. That's fair. Let me see. Okay. Another one. How common were Toa Haga teams?
Toa Haka teams?
Haga.
Oh, Haga teams.
Mm-hmm.
They were... I don't know if I would use the word common, but it wasn't like there were only two of them either.
Mm-hmm.
There were only so many situations where you needed a Haga team.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of liken them to almost like, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but I almost liken sort of like a SEAL team.
I see
mean,
that.
There's more than one of them, but there's not a zillion,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because you only use them for certain things.
Yeah.
And there's only certain people qualified to do that job.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. His final question is, how common are doors in the Matoran universe?
How common are doors?
Doors. Because I guess in a lot of the illustrations there aren't like it's just open doorways. I suppose like there aren't a lot of like closed lock doors.
Well, I think in the places that we have been, especially when you're talking about Metro Nui, my guess is that there aren't a lot, and the reason is that who needs privacy?
Yeah.
I mean, it was designed. Let's face it, you don't have doors in an anthill.
Yeah.
It was designed to be, here's a bunch of nanotech that are supposed to be running around keeping the brain functioning. They don't need privacy. They don't need to lock their doors against each other. They're not supposed to need any of that, so why would doors be built in?
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense, especially if it's a very human body analogy. Then it's like, I mean, we got valves in the heart, but that's a different situation. So, fair enough. All right, so this next few questions are from Niels A. Anderson. The first one is very specific to the Monog era kind of stuff, so I figure we'll just go ahead and move on past that. The other ones are, what is your favorite fan project?
I really don't have one.
Fair enough.
I don't pay a lot of attention to that.
I remember there was at one point you said you weren't really even allowed to. I
Well,
believe.
when I was working on Bionicle, I tried to avoid that because I didn't want to accidentally use somebody else's idea.
Makes sense.
And yeah, I mean, I've worked on so many other things since Bionicle that I've really had no reason to pay that much attention to that.
Mm-hmm. Nah, that's fair. Okay. And then the other, oh gosh, the other question is, who was more fun to write about, Liwa or Cole? Liwa from Bionicle, and obviously Cole from Ninjago.
Oh, well, I mean, Lewa had, for me anyway, more personality. He was harder to write because of the tree speak.
Oh gosh.
You have to deal with that with Cole, thank God. But, but I mean, I sort of was neither here nor there on. I loved writing Jay. Zane was fun to write. Kai was fun to write.
Mm-hmm.
Cole was an interesting character. He's got some interesting stuff going on with him as a character.
Really?
But I don't feel that I necessarily brought him to life all that vividly.
Fair. It's common in the Ninjago sphere to debate the merits of Cole's character, at least from a show perspective, because it's a whole thing. But fair enough. Also, I agree. I don't like Tree Speak. Tree Speak is just kind of. I don't want to say pointless.
Oh, there were times I would write the book. I would skip doing that, and then I'd go back and do that when the book was finished.
Oh no.
Because it would slow me down so much to have to do with the speed.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Ugh. All right. Next question is from Everett. Everett asks, first off, thank you for your work on this world and stories that so many cherish. For the question itself, if you in your mind, would the Bionicle story ever have had a conclusion, or would have just sort of continued through various stages and epochs of the world's history?
Were it up to me, no, it would not have had a conclusion. It would have. We might have ended it, sort of the way that we did, but we would have done it in such a way that the potential for more stories would exist.
Mm-hmm.
I would never, ever, ever want to see it end in such a way that people would feel like, oh, well, we can't do any more stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that would be a horrible disservice to the fans. I think it would be a disservice to the line. I mean, there were. I'm not going to say there weren't flaws in the way that it ended, but we did weave it in such a way that you had a whole new world to explore. You had the whole notion of the Maturan and the Toa and all those beings having to now integrate with the society of the Agori and the Gutorian, which would have made a lot of really interesting stories. You had just a whole chunk of the planet you've never been to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a lot left to do there. There was a lot of room for fan fiction.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, especially at the size of things. It's very rich. So, okay. Next question now. Next one is from a friend of mine, Zach Higginson. Zach, I have to apologize. A lot of these questions are they're either very easily answered or they're also very, very technical. So I'm going to just kind of pick a few here. First of all, how common were articles of clothing in the Maturan universe?
Well, I know we showed them, particularly online.
Mm-hmm.
I never particularly thought of them as common. I always thought of them just wearing armor.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because why would you need to give your nanotech clothing?
Yeah.
My guess is that whatever clothing they had, some functional purpose for existing,
Mm-hmm.
besides just ornamentation. But I never pictured.
Okay. Not unreasonable. All right. And then the other question I'm going to use here is, if you could wear a kanohi, which would you choose?
Oh goodness, I've had that one a few. Wife. There was a time when I probably would have picked Mask of Speed because I was writing 5 books at a time. Um, um, that might still be worth it for cleaning the house.
Yeah,
Um, I wouldn't mind the Mask of Invisibility. I think that would have.
that's fair. Fair, especially if like, oh gosh, if you're like you're at a concert, like you're standing in front of someone and they're trying to like peek around, you just turn invisible and it's like there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all right, excellent. Next questions are from Flaming Ninja. Um, first asks, I know that you wrote the Paper Cuts NINJAGO comics and the Dark Island trilogy. Did Lego tell you beforehand that these books would be canon/non-canon, and did that influence what you put in them?
Well, I can tell you the Dark Island trilogy is definitely canon because the story for it came from the guy who was the story runner in Billund.
Mm-hmm.
So that one is definitely canon. Nobody ever said canon or non-canon for the other one. Um, but they also, I don't think, weren't worrying about it as much at that point. Post Paper Cuts, they worry a lot more about canon, making sure things are consistent with the rest of the universe, and um, there's a lot more rules to writing for Ninjago now than there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I would run things past the story runners, and sometimes they would go, "No, this won't work," or "Well, this will only work if you do it this way," and so we would do it that way then.
Mm-hmm.
But and they had to approve everything. They had to approve plots and all that sort of thing. But I just don't think they were as worried about it at that time. So I honestly don't know if they're considered canon
Mm-hmm.
officially. I don't think I've ever seen them that, but a Dark Island is definitely canon.
Okay, excellent. Two, do you have any advice as a writer yourself for writing/world building?
Um, Enormously fun. First of all, um, I guess the standard advice I always give for writing is read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, because you're not going to learn to be a good writer if you don't read good writers.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people not to outline. That doesn't work for everyone. Some people really need it or enjoy it or get something out of it. I always found it very restrictive. And frankly, if I know what the end of the story is before I write the book, I'm going to be bored and I won't want to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like going to a movie that somebody's already spoiled for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Um, Half the fun for me is if I'm writing a book, um, there's two, and it's going well. There's two things that should be happening. One, I want to sit down and write because it's like visiting friends.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hang out with these people. And two, I want to find out what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm not excited enough about it to want to find out what happens next, the reader's not going to be either.
Yeah.
And I tried to write something. I was making a pitch to do a book that I did not end up doing. And the reason I didn't end up doing it, full outline for it, and then I had to write like a couple of sample chapters, and I, looking back, feel the sample chapters were lifeless because I had to write to that outline.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have the opportunity to go, you know what? Oh, I didn't think about this. This would be an interesting scene. What if we go in this direction? And have that option because my hands were tied by the outline that they had approved. So it was lifeless, and so I don't blame them for not wanting to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see the thought process behind that. Fair enough. Okay. In that case, we've already kind of sort of addressed this fourth question, but his third one is, what, if any, inspirations do you have that show up as common themes in your books?
Oh, gee, I can't really think of anything. I don't know if there are common themes in my books. To be honest with you, I think if somebody else would be better at addressing whether there are or not.
Mm-hmm.
There certainly weren't anything. not anything that I was really conscious of. I usually had, when I was doing Bionicle, I usually had maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks to write a book, and that was weekends only. So I didn't have a lot of time to overthink them.
Mm-hmm. That's understandable. And yeah, I think we kind of addressed this earlier, possibly, but I'll ask it again in case we didn't. Your favorite book that you've written for Lego that isn't Bionicle?
Well, it's probably one of the Ninjago graphic novels, but I'm not sure. There was one, I don't remember the name, where they end up in a parallel universe. They end up in kind of a mirror universe situation. I don't remember the name of the book, but that was a fun one to write.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, wait. I'm thinking about Mirror Universe. What was the theme again?
Yeah, it was something like that, but I don't remember. I don't remember exactly what the title of it was.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, nothing's coming to my mind. Fair enough. All right. Yao asks, is there any chance? I'm not sure if you would know this. Is there any chance that the G1 books, Bionicle books from Scholastic, would ever become available as an ebook?
I don't think so. And actually, this was something that was discussed when they were coming out originally. I asked my editor about that, and she said kids don't read ebooks.
Really?
That was the case at the time. Don't forget that was 15 years ago. But at this point, I don't even know if Scholastic has reprint rights for those books, and they certainly would not have any reason to come out again, given that there's no toys being sold.
Mm-hmm.
Because I work both ends of licensed publishing as an editor and as a writer, and when you're doing licensed publishing, you're only doing it if there's a movie coming out, TV show coming out, toys coming out, because you benefit from that free advertising.
Mm-hmm.
If there's nothing coming out to keep the line in front of people's faces, you don't want to do it by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cost you $1 zillion in marketing.
Yeah.
So you're only going to do it if it's active. Otherwise, it doesn't benefit you because you're simply not going to sell enough for it to be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I get that. All right. Okay. Next question. A lot were sent in by Good Gunel, and unfortunately, not only are a lot of these already on the TTV message boards, so they are already there. A lot of them probably belong there. We don't have enough time to get to all of these. They're very, very, very technical. But this one I think will work. In your opinion, do you think Vakama would have reached the point, be it during Reign of Shadows, after Makuta died, after Vobrakri obtained the Vahi, or at any other point, where he would have let the other Turaga in on the events that took place during Time Trap?
During what?
During Time Trap. So essentially, would Vakama have ever...
Yeah, I think he would have.
Okay.
I think he would have.
Think he might have just let him know right away. Just be like, hey, we got one.
I think that I think at some point he would have told them. I don't know when, but I think that particularly once you hit the 2010 story and Makuta's not a factor anymore, there's no real reason not to share it.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
But I don't see him. He's got such a conscience. And I think he's got such an ability to feel guilt that I think he would have a very hard time keeping something like that silent for his whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes
He's
sense.
very sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is definitely his most contrasting feature from Tahu, I would say.
Yes.
So, all right. Joam asks, I know you've told us before your favorite of the Bionicle novels you've written is Time Trap. However, if there is one that you could rewrite entirely without any story restrictions or requirements, which would it be?
Uh, I can't really think of one because the ones that stick in my mind are the ones that I liked.
That makes
Um,
sense.
the ones that maybe I wasn't as enthused about, I don't really remember that well. So the ones that really jump out at me, I mean, I remember. Um, I think maybe Isle of Darkness because not that it wasn't a good book or I didn't like it or something, but I remember as I wrote it, I said this is a little too dark, and it was getting to the point where it wasn't fun, you know. So maybe I would have rewritten that one somehow. I mean, I never got any complaints about it or anything, but I just sort of, I don't know. I got to the end of the book, I kind of felt like I needed to take a bath.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, yeah, I was a little uncomfortable with just the tone of it. It was so different from what we had been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that one.
Okay, that's fair. I just don't think you're down with the yo-yo paraka. We just gotta get you more into that sick rap, yo. No, I'm done. uh, Second question: Star Wars or Star Trek?
Original Star Trek.
Okay, very specific. I like that. All right, and then finally, what other stories or franchises would you say influenced your writing and vision of Bionicle the most?
What's the question? I didn't get that.
What other stories would you say inspired your writing in Bionicle the most? It's like, what other media that you consumed would you say had a great impact?
I would just say reading comic books from the time I was 5 years old, because that was how I learned story structure. That
Mm.
was how I learned dialogue. That was how I learned um, the the beats of a drama. Um, and that I think just informed me in general. I mean, there were things I learned about comic story writing from the people I worked with at DC when I worked on this, because I had great artists, and my attitude was always, "You guys know what you're doing. I can't tell you how to do your job, so do what you feel you need to do."
Mm-hmm.
But you know, that's how I learned to tell a story, was consuming comic books.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always read a lot of books, and I when I was a kid, and I was always a big reader. But comics were a big part of my childhood, and also after I got out of college and stuff. I mean, up until I was still buying comic books up until about probably 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, when it just got too expensive for me to be able to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So now I really rely on going on the Hoopla Digital site that connects to the libraries and just reading graphic novels through that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that had a lot to do with, I learned a lot about what's a story. I learned a lot about what's a bad story
Mm-hmm.
doing that.
Okay. Yeah. No, would you say? No, no. I'll get to that question later. But all right. I will ask though. Is there a current run of any particular comic book that's catching your fancy right now?
Uh, well, unfortunately, I've always been more of a Marvel person than a DC person too.
Really?
Unfortunately, Marvel doesn't always have that much up on Hoopla. Their stuff that's up there tends to be years and years old.
Mm-hmm.
So DC, on the other hand, is great about keeping up with Hoopla.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they'll the stuff will go up there within 6-8 months of it being published. So you are able to really follow their universe very well. So, um, which ones have I really enjoyed? Flash books have been really good that I've read. Um, the Green Lantern stuff has been pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd say that's what has been sort of a pleasant surprise for me.
Mm-hmm.
I did just read the first, uh, and I don't know where that ends up going, but the first graphic novel was good.
First graphic novel of what? Which story was that?
Immortal Hulk.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay. All right. In that case, the next few questions are from Sakota, who asks, first, as someone who really loves the Ninjago Dark Island storyline, I'd love to know what the initial pitch for the story was and what parts of it came while writing it. Was it always the idea to...
I did not make a pitch on that. I got an outline from my publisher that they had put together with the story runner and villain that was literally page by page. This is going to happen on this page. This is going to happen on that page.
Oh, wow, that's
so there was no back and forth with me about the story of my story. I was just doing the dialogue for it, basically.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. In that case, next question is, would you like to see some of the Ninjago comic characters, like the Phantom Ninja or the Time Ninja, or any of the other villains from, and the other villains from the Tower of Tears to show up in the TV show?
Sure, but it's not going to happen. I mean, one of the rules for writing for Ninjago now is that you cannot create new characters.
Oh.
You have to use the existing characters that they have. You can't make up new villains for the stories. And when I was writing it, that rule didn't exist, so I was making up new villains all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to see them become official, but I don't expect that to happen.
Dang.
They do a great job, coming up with story, and I don't think they really need my characters. So
Fair enough. Okay. And then the third question is, do you personally think, and this is a very, I don't even know if you would really want to answer it, but essentially, do you think Bionicle, as a standard system theme, with bricks and minifigures, could be faithful to the original story and feel of the world, or do you think Bionicle is dependent on being constructible action figure like it's been?
I don't know. I mean, we did system brick Bionicle,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think it did all that well. And I do kind of feel like maybe it needs to be construction simply because construction gives it the ability to have that sort of more futuristic, edgy feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly would lend itself more to comic books and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true.
If they were running around as minifigures, it's a totally different look to the comic then.
Yeah, that is fair. Okay. All right. Hector asks, what is something you've always wanted to write about that you haven't gotten the chance to, and do you have any personal projects that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I'm actually writing, besides the little freelance project I have, I'm actually writing 3 books right now.
Mm-hmm.
One I started last night.
Oh, wow.
A couple of them are things that I've had on the back burner for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see if any of them get finished. But I don't know. Well, actually, there was a book that I was writing when I was much, much younger. Much, much, much younger. And this was long before they did the Star Trek Doctor Who crossover in the comics. I was actually writing a Star Trek book with the Tom Baker Doctor Who in it. And the idea of the book was that the Klingons had discovered that if you essentially stay in one place in space but send your warp drive up to warp 10 so that you're not moving forward but you're at warp 10, you go back in time. And they've made an alliance with the Master, and they go back in time to kill Kirk when he was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And the Enterprise goes back after them, but Kirk can't go down to the planet because he can't be on the same planet as himself at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So he can only send the crew members that are younger than he is, that weren't alive at that time.
Oh.
And so I was working on that. This was back when I was probably in high school. And I was just thinking the other day that would have been a story.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough. Okay. Next few questions are from C4, and she's actually asked a few that we've kind of already covered. So I'll just take 3 here. Firstly, what is, in your opinion, the darkest HF story you've written? And likewise, the darkest. She says Lego Universe. In the Lego Universe, what's the darkest story you've written? I don't know if that's a direct reference to the game called Lego Universe.
Well, I doubt it's a reference. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's what I thought. So
I mean, the darkest Bionicle story was probably Isle of Darkness. The darkest HF story was probably the my little Living Dead homage that I did. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the darkest one as far as that goes because there's a lot of carnage in that story.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. All right, and then finally, the last question from her is also, the Hero Factory stories are my favorite, even more than Bionicle. I wish we could have learned more about the story. Would it be possible to tell us what you wanted to happen after Breakout or Brain Attack?
I actually had no plans because I wasn't on that story team.
Oh.
Okay. I didn't have anything to do with the main story. Mm-hmm. I got the chance to do the books. The books were a lot of fun to do. I enjoyed all of them. The only real guidance I ever got was that I was not allowed to reveal who was behind the brain attack. Mm-hmm. I was told that I couldn't do that. I wanted to do it, but wasn't allowed. But I didn't have any direction planned for it because I had no idea what direction they were going to take it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, fair. I don't actually think we found out who's behind the brain attack, for what it's worth.
No, I don't think it ever got revealed. I don't know who they had in mind. I had somebody.
Okay.
I don't think that it wouldn't. There's no way it would have matched with them.
Fair, yeah, because it was some random dude that just had a kind of almost Von Nebula-esque character design, and then it was just gone. So, okay. Next is from Krazix, and we're almost done with the questions. And Krazix asks, you mentioned you started off writing involved in tabletop games, and I was wondering if you think Bionicle would be a good setting for tabletop games, as a few Bionicle fan groups are creating now. And what was your favorite work you did for Lego? We've got to that one, but...
Well, I mean, yes, I think you could definitely do a Bionicle RPG, but you would probably have to approach it the way that West End approached the Star Wars RPG, in that you would not be playing Tahu, you would not be playing Kopaka, you would be playing some other team of Toa that you would make up. Mm-hmm. And you might run into them, you might show up someplace just after they left, or they might give you a mission to do because they're too busy to do it, but you would not be playing them. Because when we did Star Wars, you didn't play Luke, you didn't play Leia, you played other people fighting for the Rebels.
Yeah.
So, but yes, totally. I mean, Star Wars works great as an RPG, and I'm sure great as an RPG too.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. Yeah, no, I know that there are a few of them out there, a few Bionicle RPGs, and they're pretty in depth. So, all right. So the next question is technically from Zabla. However, it is regarding the serials, which we already discussed earlier. There's a very lengthy message, which I can read off if you'd like. However, there's also a question from an associate who asks, were you ever involved in any Star Wars projects during your time at West End Games?
Yeah, I edited the second edition. I also edited a book that Jim Bamber wrote for Star Wars called Planet of Evil, which I always thought was one of the best Star Wars adventures that we did. It was one of the best ones I was ever involved with. Mm-hmm. Because it was essentially a Star Wars version of Forbidden Planet.
Oh.
And I really loved... I mean, Jim was very, very talented, first of all. And I loved the fact that he was able to take Star Wars into that creepy, darker place, because it works very well for that universe. And now, the adventure itself is not canon because All that stuff was written before the prequels, before all that stuff.
Ah, no.
So because the opening intro to it, which I got to write, you got to see how Vader had found out the location of all the Jedi, and before he killed all of them. And this was before we really knew the story of Vader and everything and his origins. So it doesn't make sense now. But the whole idea was we tortured the information out of a Jedi, and that Jedi ends up fleeing to this planet way the hell out on the frontier, and his guilt over what he did manifests itself as an entity on the planet.
Oh.
And it was a really good story, because the way it was set up was you would see some horrible space monster attacking you, and then it would turn out it was just an illusion. But then maybe the next time it would be real. So you never actually knew until it was too late whether you were up against something that was real or not. And he did a terrific job on it.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of mind games with that. There's so many possibilities with that premise. Okay. All right. The next question is from Magic Ninja, who asks, and now I will ask beforehand, were you also given an outline for Ninjago graphic novel number 10?
No, I never got an outline. That's books.
Okay, excellent. In that case, what was the idea / inspiration behind graphic novel number 10, The Phantom Ninja, and the character in it? I'm going to pronounce it Salil. I don't know if that's correct.
Well, I don't really know that there was an inspiration for it. I just thought it was a good idea.
Fair.
And it was fun to write. I would have liked to have used her again. Something.
Okay, fair.
But there wasn't, there usually was not a specific inspiration for things unless I was having to write the main story like I did with Bionicle a lot of times. But otherwise, it was really just, I had to come up with a synopsis to run by paper cuts that they could then run by Lego. And I would just basically sit around until I came up with a good idea.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, next question is from Ford, who asks, of all the horror movie monsters out there, which is your favorite?
Let's see. It's a good question. Actually, who I would name is not actually a monster in the sense of a monster. It was actually Boris Karloff's character of Gray in The Body Snatcher. Because it is such a rich, three-dimensional, complex character with very understandable motivation. And you almost get the feeling that he is sort of what his life has made him. There's a wonderful scene, and I don't remember the quote exactly, but he's essentially blackmailing this doctor in the movie. And at one point, the doctor offers him money, to leave him alone, and that he'll make him a rich man. And Gray says, I'm a small man, I'm a little man, and I have many things that I did not want to do. But as long as I have the great Dr. Knox at my beck and call, I am a man. and he says something about the doctor says something about, why do you torment me? Why won't you just take this money and leave? And he says, because then I would lose the opportunity to torment you again.
That's sinister. Interesting.
And that actually has what I feel is one of the creepiest scenes that I've seen in a film, where Ray has to go out and get another body because the movie is about doctors needing bodies to do dissection and medical studies on.
Cadavers, yeah.
And he gets recruited to get them another body. And you've seen earlier in the movie that beautiful street singer on the streets of Edinburgh. And you see his cab going down the street toward a bridge, and you hear her singing. The bridge is all totally dark underneath the bridge, and she's singing, and the cab goes under the bridge, and all you see is that darkness under that bridge, and then the singing just stops.
Oh.
And you know he's killed her, and you didn't have to see it. And the camera just stays there, staring at that bridge for a good few seconds after the singing stops.
Oh, that is some... Oh, gosh. That's some atmosphere. That's clever.
Yeah, Val Lewton is actually the person who they call the bus scene, which they do in a lot of scary movies, where in this case, the woman is at night. She's been running away from something that scared her. And she's standing at the bus stop, and she's looking to her right because that's the direction she came from. And then you hear this horrible hiss, and the bus comes in from the left-hand side of the screen, and you jump because of that sound. Because you weren't looking on that side of the screen. You were looking on the side of the screen he was looking at.
Yeah. Goodness, that's a misdirection. Huh. Almost sounds a little bit like kind of like a jump scare, but it's a little more. It sounds a little more clever than what traditional jump scares have become, where it's kind of just silence, 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 boom, something right in front of you. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Next question is from William, who asks, did you ever acquire any non-production or obscure promotional Bionicle, I'm going to say material, whilst working with Lego? Like pieces or any such stuff?
No, I had no access to any of that. That anybody who would have had access to that, because that's where all the manufacturing was being.
Okay, all right. Did you ever? Here's a weird question. Did you ever, at any point, ever receive an inflatable Nuva Cube?
No.
No. Okay, fair enough. Okay, in that case, the last email question is from Mixel, who asks two things. One, and I feel like this is a good last email question. Well, okay, I'll leave this one. I'll flip them. You mentioned earlier the mysterious villain at the end of Breakout, or beginning of Brain Attack. Would you be allowed to say what your theory was on the villain's identity?
I don't even remember what my theory was.
Fair enough. And that makes a lot of sense. I think it was definitely Stringer. No, I'm kidding. What advice would you give aspiring future writers? Anything in specific?
I would say that I will tell a story for that. I have a very good friend, very talented writer, his own way, still in the game industry. When he wrote his first novel, it was supposed to be about people getting together and building a rocket, and they were going to go up to space, and they were going to colonize this planet. Well, 4/5 of the book was them building the rocket before they ever even got up into space. And I remember reading the book and saying, it's all build up. It's all sizzle. There's no steak, you know? And he told me that, first of all, he had sweated blood over this book.
Oh my goodness.
He just would be up all night pacing over this book. But he also told me he was afraid he didn't have enough story for 100,000 words. So that was why he had dragged out the prep part of the book so long. But then he got to the part where what the actual story was supposed to be, and he didn't have room to tell it. And the reason he was having such a hard time was that he was trying to move his characters like they were chess pieces. He was like, you have to go here and do this. You have to go here and do that. You have to go here and do this. he was moving them himself. And my message to writers always for years and years and years is trust in your characters. Your characters know what's best for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to say, I'm going to have this character go here and do this, and it's not what the character would do as you have built them, then the story ain't going to work, because the reader's going to be going, wait a second, why would he do that? That doesn't make sense. And we've all seen stories like that. And if your character is so vague and generic that you can do that with them without it being a problem, then you haven't created a very good character. The other two pieces of advice, and very pieces of advice, is if you're world building, the best way to world build is don't go into a lot of exposition early on. Throw things out very casually in conversation. Think about how, if you were new to the planet Earth, how would you learn about the planet Earth from talking to people? It would be that they would mention things that were just totally normal to them, simple everyday things to them, but you might learn a lot from just what they were saying. Mm-hmm. That's the best way to impart it. The other thing is, if you're doing like a mystery or something like that, where you want to leave a clue, but you don't want the reader to figure it out too easily, bury it in the middle of a paragraph. People traditionally will read the beginning of the paragraph and the end of the paragraph, but they don't usually remember the middle of the paragraph. So if you stick the vital clue in the middle of the paragraph, they're probably not going to notice it.
But it's still there.
It's still there.
Huh. Goodness. Like I said, not a writer, but those are really fascinating. That's really good advice. Especially, I like that one you mentioned about world building. Like how I live in the state of Idaho, which produces 1/3 of all potatoes in the entirety of the United States, also has a high desert climate and has 2 time zones. You know, casual conversation like... No, I'm kidding. But that makes a lot of sense. Because I think everyone can mostly agree some of the best... One of the best aspects about Bionicle was a lot of the world building. So hearing that come from you really illustrates.
Yeah, I mean, and if you read, like, I just finished the first book in the Witcher series.
Oh.
And that does a wonderful job of creating, characters that you understand, but it doesn't hit you with a ton of information right off the bat. Mm-hmm. You learn it all throughout the story from what the people are saying and how the people are behaving. Mm-hmm. And you get it in little drips throughout the story. So by the end, you really do understand his universe. But if they just gave it to you all up front, you probably would get so lost trying to figure all of it out that you never get to the story.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, it's information you're being fed through a fire hose.
Right.
So, that makes a lot of sense. Wow.
But that goes back to the same thing. You have to trust in writing, trust in your talent. If you feel you need to explain everything in the first chapter, then you're not trusting in yourself. You're not trusting that you're good enough to be able to find creative ways to impart this information throughout your story. Mm-hmm. You're trying to get them to understand the world as well as you understand the world and take a shortcut to doing it, and you can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's wow. That's going to be running through my head for a while. Okay. All right. In that case, we just have a few more miscellaneous things, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start winding down, and then we'll go ahead and close things out. So first of all, I don't know if you would happen to recall this. There's a Lego set called Ninjago City. It was released in like 2017.
I think that was related to the movie.
Yes, it was. Yeah. It has this huge, the instructions are massive. They're basically books in their own right. And in the beginning of the instructions, you get character blurbs. I was informed that your name was kind of intermixed in the workings on that. Did you ever actually work on that, or was it someone else entirely?
I might have. It would have been a long time ago. I might have written the blurbs for it.
Okay, fair enough. Uh, very brief, pesky pronunciation question, since these are always.
Oh God, no, no, no. I don't do those.
Fair, fair. No, it's about Liwa again. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm not touching.
Fair enough. Um, in that case, oh goodness, where is? Goodness, I had it. I had it here, right here. No, it's gone. Okay. Last question in that case is: did you ever, when writing characters, did you ever envision voices for them in your head?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Really?
Very, very often when I'm writing a book, I cast it like it's a movie.
Really?
And yes, and I will have voices of actors in my head when I write their dialogue, and then I write to the rhythm of that actor's voice.
Interesting. Gosh.
Very often, very, very often. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Especially with my own stuff, not as much with the Lego stuff, but a lot of times with my own stuff.
Oh wow. Is there in one of your novels, like what is the one character in your novels that you have an actor assigned? It's just like, no matter where this goes, this is the 1-to-1 casting.
Oh, I have a few. I mean, when I did Hell's Feast, the lead character was Robert Mitchum, and the black character was Boris Karloff. And I'm trying to remember who I used for East. I think it was a combination. I think it might have been Claude Rain, but I'm not positive.
Mm-hmm. Goodness, wow.
But yeah, that was that's very standard.
Wow. Okay. Fair enough. I did not expect that. Did you ever cast any of the Toamata? I figure I'll ask.
No, I never really did with them. I kind of thought Kopaka would sound like Batman. That was always the vision I had in my head, but I never really had much of a vision for the other ones.
Okay. That's fair. All right, that leaves fan castings open to interpretation. So that works.
Absolutely.
All right. In that case, that's everything. Those are all the questions. We've been here for, let me find the counter. All right, we've been here for almost 3 hours. I think good time as any to go ahead and wrap things up. What do you think?
Okay.
I mean, unless there's anything else you would like to impart, or honestly, heck, anything you even want to continue talking about, because like.
Oh, I think I've talked their ears off at this
point. No, my headphones. My ears get raw with headphones on, but no, we can keep talking for hours. That'd be fine. But it is getting to be about dinner time, so we should go ahead and wrap things up. Is there anything you'd like to impart upon anyone? Any final comment or words of wisdom you would like to?
Well, the only thing, and I've said this before, is, I don't know what the future of Bionicle is going to be, if it's going to have a future. But I do know that if there's no fan base, it never will. I think that, I've said before that, it was the fan base for Star Trek that brought Star Trek back. And whether it's fan fiction or, you guys do it on your own without waiting for Lego to do it, that's what's going to keep this story alive, because the fact is that Bionicle ended up being way more than a toy line. And it wound up being something that people were just as much, if not more, into than they were into anything else. And that's a testimony to a lot of the wonderful people I work with on the story team, and the people who worked on the website, and a lot of people that deserve credit for that. But stories don't die unless you want them to. And fictional universes don't die unless you want them to. So as long as there are people that care about that universe, somewhere they're still having adventures.
That's a really good way of putting it. Okay. All right. In that case, I think we'll go ahead and end it on that note. I will say, on behalf of everyone who has messaged in, I haven't been able to read all the messages in their entirety, of course, for time. But many people have expressed untold gratitude toward the work that you especially have done for the theme. The novels, the comics, interacting with people over all the years, the serials, everything. Because I know, like I mentioned, possibly even just earlier during the session, it has changed the trajectory of people's lives so drastically, in good ways, of course. And it's affected a lot of people very positively, and untold gratitude. Thank you for absolutely all of your involvement.
It was a pleasure every day, and I miss it every day.
I understand. All right, well, in that case, if there's ever a time you want to come back and just talk about absolutely anything, be it Star Trek, coffee, weather, by all means, you are more than welcome back. This has been an unbelievable blast.
Thank you.
All right. In that case, we're going to go and wrap things up. Thank you all to listening, either live or the recorded version, which should hopefully be up over this weekend. Hopefully you had as good of a time as I did. This has been wonderful. And if you have anything to add, make sure you post it in the comments below. Also, Mr. Farshtey is on the TTV message boards taking questions. Just head on over there if you have anything that wasn't asked here. So, thank you all so very much for listening. This has been yet another episode of The Eljay Johnsen Show. The show airs every single weekend, every Saturday at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, unless specified otherwise, over on Twitter at The Eljay Johnsen, where you can find updates and guest announcements every single Tuesday. And if you have any questions of the week, make sure you head on over to my email, eljayjohnsen@gmail.com. Remember, that's JOHNSEN. Nailed it. Better than the first time. Thank you all so very much for listening, and have a wonderful day.